Chapter 81. Awakener? The night passed uneventfully, and the next day arrived as expected. The two survivors in the opposite building hadn't discovered Ling and Suyu. Last night, there had indeed been quite a commotion from that building. It was highly likely that these survivors had already been dealt with. The fact that the other pair hadn't chosen to temporarily escape suggested to Ling and Suyu that they weren't good people. The current situation wasn't too bad. They took turns on watch, meaning rest time was actually quite limited. At the moment, Suyu was still leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, while Ling picked up her backpack and moved to the edge of the wall. She twisted the pendant around her neck, and the cube began to spin rapidly. Finally, a golden target symbol appeared before her eyes. Blessing pendant bonus acquired. Dead shot. All throws, fishing attempts, and ranged attacks are guaranteed to hit. Remaining time, 18 hours, 00 minutes, 24 seconds. Looks like today will still be very dangerous, she murmured to herself. With the Lord City's equipment enhancements, the Deadshot bonus was undoubtedly the most beneficial for her. Ling took out her binoculars and peered through the wall towards the distant golden desert. The sandstorm had advanced considerably overnight, now much closer to the Lord City. The only difference was that the monsters seemed to have disappeared. She sat down and took out some food from her backpack, starting on her breakfast. Beside her, Suyu gradually woke up. Time quickly passed until noon. The situation outside had begun to grow complex, so they chose to remain hidden on the top floor of the building. There were currently 50 teams left, roughly 100 survivors, likely all gradually converging on this strange city. Ling had already foreseen the final scene within the city. Everyone forced into a decisive battle due to the threat of the sandstorm. Of course, there would also be those who, in a desperate last stand, would choose to hide, content to die together with everyone else. At this point, it seemed impossible to simply survive. This island offered only two outcomes: complete the mission and leave, or annihilation. Ling, what are you thinking about? Suyu asked, looking at the girl who had drifted into thought. Let's make the most of these next 2 days to rest. I have a feeling the final battle is about to begin. Worry was evident on her face. The sandstorm was approaching faster and faster. At this rate, the second island's progress would be much quicker than the first, perhaps even ending in less than 10 days. We'll conserve our energy, pay attention to the two in the opposite building, and observe the city as well. Suyu nodded in agreement. Don't worry. If the sandstorm shrinks at a constant rate, then these 5 skyscrapers are the center of the Lord City. They'll have nowhere left to hide in the end. Ling's gaze passed through the glass towards the massive platform on the roof. Perhaps that was the final battle arena. Ling looked downstairs. Suyu's exclamation made her quickly shift her gaze. On the empty street below, a white-haired man walked with his hands in his pockets, showing no hesitation or fear. But that wasn't the most astonishing thing. Suyu, with her sharp eyesight, had noticed something unusual from the start. Every time the man took a step, a layer of frost would be left on the soles of his shoes, lingering like footprints. This was a desert, mind you, where daytime temperatures reached nearly 40 degrees Celsius. How could there be ice? Undoubtedly, this person was an ability user. Being so arrogant can only mean two things. Either he's an arrogant fool, or he has absolute confidence in his own strength. I hope it's the former, Ling said in a low voice. It seemed the Lord City truly was full of hidden talents. The ability to control elements likely indicated some sort of hidden class. The city was now seething with undercurrents, countless eyes hidden in the shadows. Yet this man walked fearlessly. Could anyone who had managed to come here and obtain a class card on the beginner island really be an idiot? Wait, could he be? Ling suddenly froze, a possibility dawning on her. What? Suyu asked, confused. An awakener. Hiss. They both sucked in a breath of cold air. They could only hope the opponent's level wasn't too high, and they absolutely couldn't confront him unless absolutely necessary. The man hadn't even bothered to scavenge equipment in the outer city. He had walked straight towards the city center. He's also heading for that arena. Keep an eye on him. If he comes to this building, we'll leave immediately. Meanwhile, Fong Lingjie and Yang Zongliang had also noticed the white-haired man. They were on a high floor of their building. They had eliminated the survivors there in a single night, a mere waste of time for them. This guy is likely an awakener. He can manifest his ability unconsciously. He must be very strong, Fong Lingjie analyzed. observing the man from above. Should we cooperate with him to clear the Lord Arena? We're probably running out of time, Yang Zongliang said seriously, pushing up the gold-rimmed glasses on his nose. No rush. A dungeon that requires 5 teams to open can't possibly be cleared by him alone. Let the other survivors test the waters first. If this arena is a one-time thing, then we'll just be unlucky, Fang Lingjie said in a low voice, his grip tightening on the samurai sword in his hand. He wanted to kill the other man, to see the difference in their strength. The ability users he had encountered before were too weak, but his own class was very special. Fang Lingjie had always believed that his class surpassed all others, even that of Yang Zongliang beside him, whose class could only be considered barely excellent. At the same time, other survivors hidden in various buildings had also noticed the white-haired man. After all, he was standing so openly in the center of the 5 skyscrapers. It was impossible to remain unnoticed. Down in the arena, the scene everyone had anticipated soon unfolded. A team of survivors arrived, confronting the man head-on. He was currently focused on the arena's prompt, pondering something. Requires 5 teams? What a ridiculous rule. I wonder if I can even wait that long here, he muttered to himself, resting his chin on one hand, completely unaware of the 2 people behind him. These 2 teammates were no pushovers. They had fought their way to this point. They didn't know about any hidden quests, only that they should kill any other survivors they encountered. After all, everyone except their teammates was an enemy, and the more they killed, the faster they could leave this hellhole. Besides, the opponent was alone. Chapter 82. Forced encounter. Before the 2 men behind him could even raise their charged bows to ambush, the white-haired man smiled wickedly, his back still to them. Rats will always be rats. His voice dripped with scorn. He didn't move, but in an instant, 2-meter-long ice spikes materialized in midair and pierced the men's chests before they could react. They stared in disbelief, feeling the bone-chilling cold spread through their chests along with the searing pain of fresh blood. The ice impaling them didn't melt. Instead, the cold intensified, freezing them solid in moments. Against an awakener, ordinary people were utterly helpless, instantly killed. The white-haired man turned slowly, no longer interested in the arena. He walked towards the frozen bodies, stretched out his hands, and touched the ice sculptures. Instantly, they shattered into countless shards of ice. With his ability withdrawn, only a pool of blood and scattered ice fragments remained, soon evaporating in the desert heat. The man scanned the surrounding buildings, chose a direction, and headed towards one of them. His swift, brutal takedown had been witnessed by the survivors hidden within the buildings. Their hearts leaping into their throats, Ling and Suyu were also deeply troubled. They hadn't even seen how he attacked. He had eliminated his opponents with such swift efficiency. It's confirmed. He's an awakener, and Ling said with absolute certainty. Even she couldn't have instantly killed 2 survivors about to attack, not with such effortless precision. At the very least, her flying swords needed to face the opponent and travel a distance, taking up precious time. The swords could kill, but the opponent's attacks would follow, and she'd need to use her energy shield to protect herself. This man, however, had been fast enough to kill them before they could even release their arrows, his speed astonishing and utterly unpredictable. And Ling, he's going to that building? Suyu exclaimed, watching the man approach the survivor-occupied skyscraper. And Ling quickly looked over, wondering how he would enter a building 5 stories high without using a grappling hook. What happened next left them, and every other survivor watching, stunned and speechless. The man stood at the base of the building. Frost rapidly spread from his feet, forming an irregular circle of ice. Then, a massive ice pillar, thicker than a person, shot upwards, lifting him steadily. The building's wall began to corrode with the cold, thin ice tendrils extending from it to connect with the central pillar, creating a stable structure. Everyone watched in astonishment as the pillar quickly reached over 10 meters. The man casually stepped off the ice and into the building's first floor, the ice behind him melting and dissipating. Is that even human? Suyu stammered, at a loss for words. And Ling stared at the melting ice pillar. For a moment, she had considered attacking it, trying to disrupt the Awakener's ascent. But she realized such a crude tactic wouldn't likely work against a powerful Awakener, and might even provoke him. So she had refrained. So that's an Awakener. She was equally shocked. The power he wielded was simply overwhelming. Anyone facing him would be instantly killed. At least he went into the other building. He'll probably clash with those two. It's perfect, Suyu said, relieved that he hadn't targeted their building. But seconds later, before the man had even fully entered the other building and before they could recover from the display of power, they saw two men from the top floor of that same building smash through the window and use grappling hooks to swing over to their skyscraper. Suyu was speechless. I take that back. This is bad. And Ling stood up. Those two weren't idiots. They wouldn't try to fight an awakener head-on. Fleeing was the only smart choice. Unfortunately, their building was the closest, so they had come here. These were the two teams in the Lord City that posed the biggest threat to Ling and Suyu, and now a direct confrontation was unavoidable. Ling, should we run? Suyu asked anxiously. Run where? To another building? Ling countered. We don't know the strength of the survivors in other buildings, and besides, we don't need to be afraid of them. Her meaning was clear. It was better to face these two than blindly rush into another unfamiliar building. They hadn't fought yet. Who would win or lose was still uncertain. The other team was a few floors below them, not too far away. Smashing a window and running now would only increase the risk of exposure. Besides, smart people might not necessarily attack them. Of course, it all depended on what the awakener did. I understand, Suyu said, putting on her backpack and drawing her weapon, her eyes fixed on the stairwell. Ling stood ready with her sword, glancing at the opposite building. The awakener was nowhere in sight, clearly unconcerned about the two who had fled. Her expression was calm. She didn't show any fear at the prospect of facing abilities users on her level. Suyu, however, as the ranged fighter, gradually retreated, her nervousness palpable. As Ling had predicted, the two men downstairs had no other choice. They wouldn't go down. They intended to come all the way to the top floor. Only up there, facing a powerful awakener, would they have even the slightest chance to escape, especially since they lacked any supportive gear. Footsteps. Soon, soft footsteps echoed from below. The two men were moving quietly, but it was pointless against Suyu's enhanced senses. Ling, they're coming up, she whispered. Ling hadn't let her guard down either. Her enhanced ability also meant her senses were sharper. She took out her charged crossbow and aimed steadily at the stairwell. Both women held their breath. From the men's cautious approach, it seemed their intentions didn't align with Ling's own. If that was the case, then there was no choice but to fight. Chapter 83. All Hidden Classes. The instant the two men rounded the corner of the stairs, four pairs of eyes met, and Ling and Suyu launched a decisive attack. Whoosh! Whoosh! Two red laser beams shot out. But the other team was prepared. As fellow ability users, how could they be killed by the Lord City's energy weapons? Yang Zongliang sneered, and his figure vanished instantly from the stairwell. Meanwhile, Fong Lingjie drew his long sword and sliced through the incoming energy bolts. Nice one. He grinned, sparks flying as his blade scraped the floor. He coiled his legs, then lunged at Ling, the closer target, the same instant. Yang Zongliang reappeared behind Suyu. He held no weapon, reaching out to grab her with his bare hands. Whoosh! A red bolt flew towards him, and he disappeared again. Suyu immediately went on alert, scanning her surroundings. The man's ability was likely teleportation, a supportive ability with little threat on its own. But combined with energy weapons, it made him an incredibly elusive and dangerous foe. Ling holstered her crossbow and met Fong Lingjie's attack head-on with her sword. Clang! Steel clashed, sparks flew. Their blades met in a flurry of strikes, exchanging 7 or 8 blows in mere moments. Ling felt a slight numbness in her hand. This swordsman was weaker than the last one she'd fought, someone she could handle. Their skills were comparable. The only difference was the gap in strength due to their physical attributes. Fong Lingjie seemed momentarily surprised, but then excitement flashed in his eyes. Interesting. Zongliang, you deal with that one. This one's mine. Clang, clang. The clash of steel produced a shrill ringing sound. Ling's face was grim. She was certain her opponent was an ability user, but his specific ability was still unknown. Perhaps, like her, he had a hidden ability to control his sword? In that moment, Ling paused. After parrying another attack, she sensed something was off. She swiftly swept her blade, forcing Fong Lingjie back, and then retreated rapidly. He simply flicked his sword, a smile lingering on his face, and didn't immediately pursue. They faced each other, a silent understanding creating a temporary pause in the battle. And Ling glanced at her iron sword. Seeing no cracks, she felt relieved. She couldn't hide her strength anymore. She should have made two swords. Her opponent's class seemed to have a hidden trait, a passive skill, similar to resonance and precision strikes. That was just her guess. In their brief exchange, every one of his strikes had hit the same spot on her blade. If it continued, her sword would be shattered. The material of his sword was also unknown, but clearly very durable. And Ling extended her hand, and the iron sword rose into the air. Even Fang Lingjie was momentarily taken aback. His assumptions had been far from the truth. As Ling's finger lowered, the sword shot towards him like a streak of light. Fang Lingjie wasn't concerned, raising his sword to deflect the attack. Bang! He stumbled back 2 steps, his expression shifting to surprise. The power had increased dramatically. His hand stung from the impact, but before he could react, the flying sword was attacking him again. Clang! This time, he barely managed to block the attack. His opponent was clever, realizing the secret of his resonance and deliberately avoiding previous impact points with each strike. Fang Lingjie gritted his teeth. Aside from the Awakener, this was the strongest survivor he'd faced yet. Her class was very unusual. He looked at Ling, his right hand tightening on his sword hilt. In a contest of raw strength, he knew he would lose. His only chance to win was to get close and strike her down. Although she also possessed decent close combat skills, without her sword, she would be vulnerable. The next instant, Fang Lingjie charged at Ling. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several red bolts flew towards him. With a hum, a large energy shield expanded, completely blocking them. They had no choice now. Both sides were forced to rely on energy equipment in this fight. Meanwhile, Suyu's class enhanced her 6 senses, a strong counter to a teleporter. No matter which direction he appeared from, she would notice him instantly, preventing any sneak attacks. As time went on, his teleportation intervals grew longer, and his range shorter. Their ability levels weren't in the same league. Suyu couldn't understand how they had managed to cooperate and survive this long. Yang Zongliang was growing frustrated. No matter how he tried, he couldn't get close to her. Of course, his primary goal was to stall, but without being able to engage in close combat, he was becoming exhausted. If he didn't find a solution, he would be defeated. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with an idea. He teleported some distance away and immediately began firing his energy crossbow wildly. Suyu wasn't fast, so she had to block. She was cornered, using her energy shield to fend off the storm of bolts. Within a minute, both of their weapons were running low on power. Since crossbows had a larger battery than shields, Yang Zongliang still had some power left, while Suyu's shield was completely depleted. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The attacks continued, but she didn't panic, because her own crossbow was fully charged. Instantly, the room was filled with flashing red light. All incoming bolts were intercepted, but when the red light faded, Yang Zongliang was gone. Then, Suyu sensed a gaze from her side. Her right hand gripped a metal arrow and thrust it towards the source without hesitation. Bang! Fragments of the wall exploded, but the attack missed. In that moment, she felt a hand lightly touch her shoulder. She instinctively attacked behind her, but the man was gone, appearing some distance away. Suyu, puzzled, quickly checked herself. She found nothing amiss. His close combat skills were terrible, even worse than hers, an archer. Yang Zongliang, a distance away, wore a surprised expression. He could sense a change in his own power. I didn't think it would be a hidden class. He calmly began recharging his energy crossbow, but Suyu wouldn't wait for him to be ready. Instantly, more laser bolts flew towards him. Then something astonishing happened. He raised his hand and shot down all her attacks with perfect accuracy. How is that possible? Chapter 84. The Lord Arena. Judging by their earlier exchange, the man clearly didn't know how to use a bow. How had his skill improved so dramatically? He can copy other people's abilities. And Ling suddenly shouted, alerting Suyu, who immediately switched her tactics. Now they needed to determine if he could combine abilities. If so, they were in trouble. A combination of sharpshooter and teleportation would be a nightmare. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The two women unleashed a barrage of attacks. Sharpshooter's full firepower erupted. the entire floor filled with laser bolts colliding and exploding. Even Ling and Fong Lingjie had to momentarily take cover. This was the first time Ling realized that the sharpshooter class enhancement amplified not only power but also the number of arrows. The flashing red light, reflected through the black glass walls, caught the attention of several onlookers outside. This unusual display, naturally, also caught the eye of the Awakener with the ice ability. The copied ability wasn't a perfect replica. Its power was only half of Su Yu's. But as a ranged class, it was more than enough to keep him occupied for the time being. After using Su Yu's ability, the man's teleportation vanished. It seemed he could only copy one ability at a time. That made him less of a threat. Ling and Fong Lingjie exchanged a glance and were about to attack again, when a massive ice pillar burst through the wall of the opposite building. The white-haired man stood atop it, gliding towards them. "The Awakener is coming." Her cry made the other three abandon their fight and turn towards the window. Decisive stopped engaging Yang Zongliang and quickly joined Ling. They backed away cautiously, preparing to leave the building. Fong Lingjie and Yang Zongliang did the same, sticking together. Fong Lingjie glanced at the long sword in his hand, then at the white-haired girl, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Hey, how about we put our little feud aside? We could team up and take down this Awakener." Su Yu and Yang Zongliang were startled by the suggestion. Only Ling considered it. It was worth a try. The situation was chaotic, and the future unpredictable. For hidden classes together presented the best chance to challenge the Awakener. If they separated now, their chances of survival against him later would be slim. All right, and Ling agreed decisively. Her confidence wasn't solely based on their combined strength, however. "Are you two crazy?" Yang Zongliang frowned, looking at the two as if they'd lost their minds. Before anyone could continue the discussion, the building's glass shattered, and the massive ice pillar, radiating a chilling aura, pierced through the wall. The white-haired man casually stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the four tense figures before him. "You four are the biggest rats I've seen yet," he chuckled. "But I'm not bloodthirsty. Relax. How about we join forces and claim the rewards from the Lord Arena?" He stated his intentions directly. The four were stunned. He hadn't come to fight? He seemed incredibly confident, but the hidden quest required 5 teams, forcing him to seek cooperation. "We can do that, but we're still 2 teams short," Ling said, exchanging a glance with Fong Lingjie. The four subtly moved closer, forming an unspoken alliance. "He and I are separate teams, so we only need one more," Yang Zongliang clarified, adjusting his glasses. "We can easily grab another team later. Now, before we go, why don't we each share our class and level? It'll help with coordination," the white-haired man suggested. He didn't seem bothered by their alliance. It was just a survival tactic of the weak, as far as he was concerned. "To show my sincerity, I'll go first." By Lin, Dark Knight level, Elementalist class. His casual words shocked the others. He was an Awakener just one step away from the Mammoth Knight level. Fortunately, Awakeners couldn't level up further. Yang Zongliang, Blue Soldier level, Transcendent class. He calmly stated his class, but the name was vague, offering no clues about his abilities. "Su Yu, Blue Soldier level, Sharpshooter class," she murmured, standing behind Ling. Fong Lingjie sneered, undeterred by the Awakener's presence. Fong Lingjie, Purple Soldier level, Anomaly Breaker class. Ling, Purple Soldier level, Sword Master class. Ling spoke last. There was no need to hide anymore. No one knew it was a unique hidden class anyway. It was all speculation. Yang Zongliang and Bai Lin's classes were likely common ones, while only the cocky Fong Lingjie also had a hidden class. It seems everyone is being honest. Then let's go. Bai Lin headed for the exit. After a few steps, he turned back with a smile. "By the way, need a ride?" "No, thanks." The four refused instantly. Only a fool would accept. 100 meters in the air? They would be completely at his mercy. Bai Lin left first. The four prepared to use their grappling hooks to descend quickly, but they hesitated. "It seems the beautiful Ling and I are thinking alike," Fong Lingjie said with a smirk. "There's no guarantee he'll keep his word after the hidden quest is over. It looks like our cooperation will have to last until we leave this island," Ling stated. Her thoughts mirrored the others. Once the hidden quest was complete, they would join forces. Even if they didn't try to kill the Awakener, they certainly wouldn't let him eliminate them. "No problem," Fang Lingjie and Yang Zongliang agreed. With 25 teams remaining, and the 4 of them working together, the biggest threat, the Awakener, was neutralized. Victory seemed within their grasp. Almost simultaneously, the 4 fired their grappling hooks, latching onto the iron chains outside the building and sliding down. Moments later, they landed in the central arena, following close behind by Lin. How did he do that so fast? Suyu gasped. In the short time it took them to descend, Bai Lin had somehow captured another survivor to use as a pawn. Open the switch and I'll consider sparing your life, Bai Lin sneered at the captive survivor, then turned to the others. Everyone, take your positions. Chapter 85. Entering the arena. The 6 members of the 5 teams each approached one of the 5 phone booth-like devices. A system prompt appeared, and they exchanged glances. There was no turning back now. Hidden within the surrounding buildings, survivors watched the scene unfold. Both Suyu and Yang Zongliang could sense dozens of eyes on them. Enter the Lord Arena? All 5 confirmed without hesitation. In the next second, a blinding light engulfed the arena. When the light subsided, the 6 figures were gone. And Ling, having adjusted to the brightness, blinked her eyes open. They were in a massive arena. The circular battlefield was surrounded by high stands, beyond which rose decaying silver walls. Above, a giant, futuristic membrane enclosed the entire space. The 5 teams stood at different points around the arena's perimeter. In the center, 4 enormous light screens formed a cube, displaying information. Current level, 1. Time remaining, 99 seconds. Everyone saw the message and paused. What is this, a tower defense game? Fang Lingjie scoffed. So it's not a 5-team battle against a lord? And Ling wondered. The term, level 1, was rather ambiguous. Who knew how many levels there were? And the enclosed space offered no escape route. Stay close to the center. He was right. This is probably a tower defense. The monsters can't just appear out of thin air, so they must come from the walls. And Ling said to Suyu, her eyes scanning their surroundings. Right? Suyu nodded, moving towards the open space. The timer reached 0. Cracks appeared in the silver walls, and the sunlight-fearing monsters they had encountered before emerged, rushing towards them. They weren't numerous and were easily dispatched. Current level, 2. Time remaining, 89 seconds. Phew, if it's just ordinary monsters, we should be fine, Suyu sighed, relaxing slightly. The break time is shorter. And Ling murmured, no way. Suyu tensed up. You mean the monsters will get stronger, and eventually there won't be any break time at all? Across the arena, Bai Lin remained relaxed, seemingly unconcerned about the escalating threat. The timer reached 0 again. This time, a swarm of venomous insects poured out from the walls, a writhing, dense mass. The 4 found themselves in a difficult position. They had no effective way to deal with the insects. And Ling quickly pulled out a canister of gasoline from her backpack. With her ability, she crushed the container, instantly vaporizing the gasoline into a mist. As the insects reached her feet, click, the lighter in her hand sparked. Boom. The gasoline ignited, engulfing the area in flames. The insects, coated in the flammable liquid, burned with a crackling sound. Ling carefully controlled the flames with her ability, creating a protective ring around herself and Suyu. The insects couldn't get close. Seeing the gasoline, Fang Lingjie realized that these were the people who had reached the Lord City before him. He and Yang Zongliang used the same tactic, creating 2 fire barriers that kept the insects at bay. They now targeted Bai Lin and the captive survivor, who was already near death from the insects' bites. Bai Lin, however, was perfectly equipped to handle the swarm. Anything that approached him was instantly frozen solid. Level 2 ended quickly, and Ling glanced at the timer on the light screen. It had decreased by another 10 seconds. Soon, the level 3 monsters arrived. Unlike the previous waves, these creatures were slender, with long limbs and a grotesque, crawling gait. They resembled something out of a horror movie, like Sadako or the Xenomorph. What are those things? Suyu and Ling shuddered, disgusted by the sight of the green slime covering the creatures. Thud, thud, thud. The monsters suddenly sprang from the stands, launching themselves towards the 5 people in the arena. In an instant, countless monsters descended from above, their mouths agape, circular maws that looked large enough to swallow a person's head whole. Whoosh, whoosh. Laser beams pierced the bodies of several monsters, but the wounds were too small to be fatal. They continued their descent, propelled by momentum. Suyu, get back. I'll handle this. And Ling stepped forward, her iron sword transforming into a blur of motion. A flash of brilliant light, and several airborne monsters exploded into chunks. Green rain fell from the sky. The acidic liquid sizzled on contact with the ground, even corroding the hard silver material. And Ling flicked the slime away with her ability and pulled Suyu's hand, dodging the falling monsters. Their weak point is the crystal-like protrusion below their necks. They shouted to each other as they evaded the attacks. And Ling had discovered the weakness when she sliced through the first monster. Swish! Another monster fell, cleaved in two. And Ling's mind raced. With their crawling gait, it would be difficult to target their weak points under normal circumstances. Feng Lingjie was struggling. While he could kill the monsters easily, avoiding the splattering acidic slime was proving difficult. They glanced at the timer, which was ticking down. If they didn't eliminate the monsters before the end of level 3, the remaining creatures would carry over to the next round. 2 waves of monsters combined would be overwhelming, and eventually, they would be overrun. To the stands. And Ling pulled Suyu along, firing her grappling hook. They soared towards the stands, nearly 10 meters high. Seeing their targets move, the monsters leaped after them. This was their chance. As the creatures climbed over the edge of the stands, and Ling and Suyu unleashed a volley of attacks with their charged crossbows. Chapter 86, The Ruler? In an instant, the monsters hovering in midair exploded as if triggered by some mechanism, creating streaks of dark green fireworks. The number of these monsters was limited, and the 3rd level was quickly cleared. Soon after, with barely any time to rest, the monsters of the 4th level arrived, though they still posed little challenge to the group for the moment. This was a group of strange, tentacled monsters, moving slowly, their black tentacles lined with spikes, like some kind of slime. Undoubtedly, the monsters of the 4th level were stronger than those of the 3rd. And Ling, with Suyu, decisively jumped down from the stands, away from the danger. Compared to the monsters on the previous level, these creatures moved slowly and didn't pose much of a threat to the group. Apart from Bai Lin, who could easily deal with them using his ability, the other 4 were starting to feel a bit strained. With Ling slaying the last tentacle monster in the arena, the group concluded the battle on the 4th level. Congratulations! Your experience points have accumulated, and your ability level has been upgraded to Gold Soldier. She felt a warm current surge through her entire body, a peculiar sensation that made her feel comfortable, and the fatigue from before was swept away. I've actually leveled up again. This would provide a greater guarantee in dealing with the upcoming battles. At this moment, only 30 seconds of rest time remained. With just half a minute, before the group could catch their breath, the monsters of the 5th level attacked. Boom! Boom! A gigantic monster, wielding an oversized battle axe, strode slowly forward from the audience stands. Unlike the previous 4 levels, there were no smaller monsters on this level, only this one boss in front of them. Could this be the ruler of the endless wasteland? The 4 of them were startled by the aura emanating from the giant monster, but they dared not act rashly. It wore a rusted helmet, and a thick, arm-sized chain was wrapped around its massive battle axe. Its figure was enormous, estimated to be at least 3 meters tall, and every step it took made the ground tremble. Boom! Its colossal body suddenly dropped from the nearly 10-meter-high stands. Before the group could react, the chain pulled the giant axe with a whooshing sound, sweeping towards them. This monster's movements were fast, but Ling wasn't worried, because the first to face this attack would be Bai Lin, who was at the center. The sweeping giant axe carried immense power, and at this moment, no one dared to confront it head-on, all preparing to use their grappling hooks to dodge the attack. Only Bai Lin stepped forward alone. With a whoosh, a layer of frost covered the entire arena, the temperature plummeting. The ground was quickly covered and spread with frost, and the monster was not spared. Its body began to stiffen, gradually freezing. The frost spread along the chain, rapidly extending towards the giant axe, making a series of cracking sounds. But the incoming attack didn't slow down. The huge axe still aimed directly at Bai Lin's face. Whoosh! Just then, a red laser beam shot out, accurately hitting the frozen chain. With a crack, the ice-covered chain snapped, and the giant axe, losing the pull of the chain, flew past Bai Lin's side, allowing him to successfully dodge the attack. A strong wind whistled, blowing the white hair on his forehead to one side. He was expressionless, as calm and collected as before. Unnecessary. Bai Lin sneered, ignoring Suyu, who had saved him, and instead directly controlled his ability to attack the monster, whose movements had become sluggish. Having lost its weapon, it only had its brute strength left. At the same time, Fang Lingjie, Yang Zongliang, and even Ling launched attacks. This monster was suspected to be the ruler, and whoever took its head would receive more rewards. But Ling didn't rush forward, only using her crossbow for ranged attacks. Bai Lin was the main force against this monster, and if she openly attacked now, it would only provoke his anger. However, Fang Lingjie and Yang Zongliang didn't think that much. They only knew that if they killed the ruler, there was a high probability of directly escaping the Death Wasteland Island. Where would they need to worry about Bai Lin's anger then? Several laser arrows struck instantly. The monster's movements were slow, and it couldn't dodge. Its huge body was instantly pierced, with several finger-thick wounds appearing, but it didn't die. Instead, it became enraged. Boom! It slammed its fists into the ground, easily breaking free from the ice's restraint and forcing Bai Lin, who was attacking, to retreat. Seeing its attack fail, the monster didn't choose to continue attacking Bai Lin, but instead rushed towards its weapon. Clang! A sharp blade light flashed, and the huge body instantly fell to the ground due to inertia. Fang Lingjie had directly severed half of the monster's leg. Following the monster's fall, before anyone could react, Fang Lingjie stabbed his blade into the monster's skull. The four of them were stunned for a moment, not expecting it to be resolved so easily, the key point being that someone had snatched the kill. Fang Lingjie was overjoyed, already preparing to leave the island early. Bai Lin was furious. "You brat, you're looking for death." The surrounding frost surged, and he immediately went to kill Fang Lingjie. However, at this moment, Fang Lingjie truly panicked because the system didn't indicate the hidden task was completed, and he couldn't leave the island. What's going on? This is impossible. Seeing Bai Lin about to attack, Yang Zongliang fell silent, standing in place, momentarily unsure of what choice to make. And Ling and Suyu also decided to wait and see for now. Everyone thought he was about to leave the island, but seeing his panicked expression, it was clear that the hidden task hadn't been completed. Ling was the first to notice this and immediately looked at the screen in the center of the arena. Remaining time, 3, 2, 1, 0. As the countdown reached 0, the level above them switched to the 6th level, and no other new monsters appeared around them, which meant, "Get away from the monster's corpse." And Ling shouted a warning to the two men, then quickly retreated with Suyu. Immediately after, the monster suddenly opened its eyes. A surge of energy flowed from its body. Its black flesh cracked and turned inside out, instantly covering its entire body with a layer of black metal armor. It resurrected? Fang Lingjie quickly dodged, and Bai Lin calmed his inner anger. The team, which had almost fallen apart just now, tacitly reached cooperation again at this moment. It's been strengthened. I'm afraid we'll have to face this constantly strengthening and resurrecting monster for the next few levels, until it becomes the ruler of the endless wasteland. And Ling's expression was somewhat solemn. The upcoming battles would be very difficult, and the 5 of them would have to cooperate fully. Chapter 87. Just an Awakened One. This monster wasn't absurdly strong. As long as its armor was broken, it could still be easily killed, similar to before. At this moment, Suyu and Yang Zongliang's roles had become negligible. Their attacks had no effect on the monster in front of them, leaving only Ling, Fang Lingjie, and Bai Lin to carry out the main confrontation. Soon, the monster was killed again, and the level gradually reached the 7th. The battlefield was eerily quiet at this moment. Only the sound of heavy breathing and rapid heartbeats could be heard. The 5 of them formed a circle, vigilantly watching the light screen in the center of the arena. The red numbers on the screen flashed, reminding them that this was the last level and also the most dangerous. The monster awakened again. This time, the aura it emitted was far more terrifying than before. Beneath its helmet, its eyes glowed with a scarlet light, and bone spurs grew from its limbs and back, as if proclaiming its power and ruthlessness. The 4 of them had grim expressions. Even Bai Lin couldn't help but gasp, feeling unprecedented pressure. They knew that this was a life-or-death battle, and they had to go all out. The five of them had determined looks in their eyes, ready to face the monster's attack. Roar. It roared and charged at the five people around it with its giant axe. With a boom, the huge axe hammered the ground, instantly causing massive destruction. The solid silver material of the ground was torn up, and dust flew everywhere. They engaged in a fierce battle with the monster, with blades flashing, swords clashing, and sparks flying. Countless laser arrows flew across the arena. Suyu's attacks precisely hit the same spot on the monster every time, and Yang Zongliang also noticed this. The two of them worked together from a distance, continuously wearing the monster down with their charged crossbows. The monster's attacks were exceptionally fierce. Bai Lin used his ability to directly confront the monster's attacks head-on, while Fang Lingjie acted like an assassin, roaming around, looking for opportunities. And Ling wasn't foolish enough to engage the monster in close combat. Instead, she used her sword control technique to wear it down from a close distance. The battle was extremely intense, and at this moment, the entire arena had been turned into a mess by the fight between the five of them and the monster. Just then, the red laser arrows finally managed to pierce the monster's armor, and Ling seized the opportunity, controlling her flying sword to stab directly into the opening. The monster roared in pain and was about to resist when its frozen feet caused it to collapse with a dull thud. Now! Fang Lingjie shouted, and the five of them swarmed forward. Bai Lin instantly froze the monster completely. Blade and sword attacks followed, striking the monster through the gaps in the armor's joints, and green liquid sprayed out. However, their attacks had a negligible effect and couldn't cause fatal damage. Without Bai Lin, it would be difficult for the four of them to defeat this giant monster, only managed to restrain it at most. But that wouldn't complete the task. The outer layer of armor was also extremely hard. Even the laser from the charged crossbows needed to attack continuously many times to pierce it. Suddenly, Suyu seemed to have noticed something and gestured to Ling with her eyes, but this scene was clearly seen by Fang Lingjie. Without hesitation, he jumped up and stepped on the monster's body, swinging his blade towards a slightly larger red mark on its abdomen. The monster's entire body was covered with these strange red spots, and no one would have thought that one of them was its hidden weak point. Clang! A flying sword blocked Fang Lingjie's weapon, and then, turning in midair, it stabbed straight down At this time. The others hadn't even reacted to why the two of them suddenly attacked each other, and the iron sword had already pierced the monster's body. What? You bastard! And Ling quickly distanced herself with Suyu. The monster in front of them stopped struggling and began to dissolve into a pool of pus that spread out. Congratulations on completing the Ruler Arena challenge and obtaining a special reward. Current options: leave Death Wasteland or continue survival. While Ling was still thinking, the special reward had already been distributed to the five of them. A red card, an upgrade card. At this moment, Bai Lin was on the verge of rage because his kill had been stolen, and now that each of the four had an upgrade card in their hands, he had no choice but to act. Hesitation leads to defeat. He had to kill them before they escaped the island. At this moment, the light screen in the center of the arena gradually disappeared, revealing a passage leading to the outside world. Above them were the 5 towering skyscrapers, but the outside world was now pitch black. Yang Zongliang immediately chose to leave the island. Now that he had a chance to escape, he wouldn't be foolish enough to fight an awakened one. Damn it! Fang Lingjie cursed. The odds of 3 against 1 were even lower. Although he liked to fight, he wasn't stupid enough to throw his life away, so he also chose to leave the island. This departure was different from the previous Rookie Island. Almost instantly, the two of them disappeared from sight, leaving Bai Lin no time to react. He stopped his attack and looked at Ling and Suyu, who were still stunned in the distance. Without saying anything, he turned and attacked them. Not running away. How foolish. Ling! Suyu shouted anxiously. The two of them were a team, and they needed both of them to agree to leave. Ling didn't respond. She turned her head to look at Bai Lin, who was attacking with freezing cold. At this moment, she could feel his chilling aura pressing in on her. Bang! A flash of white light, followed by a loud noise, and the air filled with a pungent smell of gunpowder. Ling held a gun in one hand, staring coldly at Bai Lin in the distance. In this second, the world was silent. Suyu's mouth was agape, her face full of disbelief. Bai Lin, in the distance, felt a cold wind rush into his brain, and then a drop of blood slid down his cheek. He glared in anger, unable to believe that his powerful self would meet this end. Unfortunately, the bloody hole in his head no longer allowed him to think. His body collapsed at that moment, and he completely lost consciousness. Showy and useless. And Ling said dismissively, putting away her pistol. An awakened one? Aren't they still just flesh and blood? What's there to be so arrogant about? And Ling, you? Suyu was still shocked. Such a powerful awakened one was dealt with so easily? They can have grenades, so it's reasonable for us to have pistols, right? She said with a smile, walking over to the corpse and picking up the red card. All fear comes from insufficient firepower. Chapter 88. Preparing to grind monsters. With those 3 gone, there are less than 40 teams left. It's almost the final circle, and the rewards for surviving until the end will be greater. My plan is to stay. What about you? And Ling stood up and turned to look at Suyu. I'll listen to you. Suyu didn't know what to think for a moment, but knowing that Ling had a gun and that even powerful awakened ones were no match for firearms, surviving until the end seemed like a sure thing. Okay, then let's go. And Ling smiled. She had another reason for staying, which was to kill as many monsters as possible to gain experience points and upgrade her ability. Following the passage outside, it was already dark. Looking up, the protective shield overhead had become increasingly thin, appearing as if it could shatter at any moment. Suyu, how many people are around? And Ling asked, turning her head. This ruler arena was undoubtedly the focus of everyone's attention. Now that it was open, who knew how many people were watching this place? It was perfect to rely on Suyu's ability to detect the positions of others. 22, scattered among 4 buildings, she said in a low voice after sensing around. That's 11 teams. Eliminating them will leave us with about 30 teams, very close to our goal. And Ling took out binoculars and looked at the edge of the city. The sandstorm was now very close. Perhaps related to the ruler arena being cleared, the sandstorm's speed had increased again. You lead the way. Tonight, we'll eliminate all of them. And Ling said the most chilling words in the calmest tone. Suyu nodded. She hadn't just met Ling today and knew her decisive character. It was just a pity for these survivors who were secretly observing, unaware that danger was quietly approaching. Whoosh. A grappling hook shot out from the mechanical device on her right arm, instantly flying towards the entrance of a building. The 2 figures flew upwards at an extremely fast speed. Their figures were like ghosts, shuttling back and forth between 2 buildings, and soon arrived at one of the locations Suyu had indicated. At this moment, the 2 survivors inside the building were still observing Suyu and Ling, who were moving swiftly outside, wondering what their intentions were. Suddenly, 2 figures rapidly enlarged in their field of vision. Not good, they're coming for us. Crack. The glass exterior wall instantly shattered. A figure flashed by, and then the 2 survivors were killed by Ling with a single sword strike, dying on the spot before they could even react. The iron sword danced in the air. The 2 of them landed steadily and walked forward to start sorting through the other's supplies. 1 team down. Let's hurry. And Ling casually stuffed the food into her backpack and set off again, following Suyu's senses. The bigger the commotion they made, the better. As long as they stood in a conspicuous place and could be noticed, none of these survivors would be able to escape. Soon, the kill notifications popping up on the light screen made all the survivors present feel a sense of inexplicable fear. Only now did they finally realize that the other party had a way to detect their positions. But to determine the 2 women's movements, they had to observe their location, which led to their own positions being exposed. They probably never understood until their deaths that their locations were exposed just by looking at the other party. The killing continued, but it was limited to the 5 buildings. As for the survivors still wandering outside the city, the 2 women didn't waste their energy on them. It wasn't until late at night, when they both felt deeply fatigued, that they stopped. At this point, all the survivors in the 5 buildings had been eliminated, and the amount of food they had seized was so much that they couldn't even fit it all in their backpacks. Current teams remaining, 29. And Ling leaned against the wall of the building, her chest heaving slightly. Suyu was also exhausted. They rested for a moment and then openly lit a bonfire in a room on the top floor, sitting down together to eat dinner. Now, all the survivors in the city knew that there were 2 extremely powerful ability users in the city center, and that they could also detect locations. No one dared to go to the buildings anymore. They were all hiding in the outer city. The city's protective shield was still there, so the outer city was currently very safe, without the danger of monsters and sandstorms. Inside the building, the two of them roasted food over the bonfire, eating the spoils they had seized. This feeling was incredibly satisfying. The only downside was that they couldn't get a good rest. And Ling, why did we stop? Suyu was a little puzzled. Before this, she had sensed several gazes. At this rate, they could have directly killed everyone in one, leaving the island. No rush, Suyu. There's another reason why I chose to stay. And Ling paused, looking at Suyu's cute face, illuminated by the firelight, with a hint of doubt. These monsters can increase the level of my ability. I stayed to grind levels and get as strong as possible. I see. Suyu understood. In the previous ruler arena, her ability level had increased by killing monsters. She had originally thought it was the effect of the instance, but now it seemed that ordinary monsters could do the same. So you intentionally left these people alive. That's right. We'll rest well tonight. Judging by the current speed of the sandstorm, it'll probably take until tomorrow morning or evening to reach the ruler city. We'll wait until night. By then, the protective shield will definitely not be able to hold, and when the monsters enter the city, it will be our opportunity. This was in Ling's plan, to maximize her gains before leaving. Okay, then let's rest as much as possible. After fighting for so long, they were both physically and mentally exhausted. Although the survivors in the city had been scared out of their wits by the two women and didn't dare to enter the city center anymore, to be cautious, the two of them, high up in the building, still chose to take turns keeping watch. The night passed uneventfully, and morning arrived as scheduled. They ate a simple breakfast and continued to rest. There was nothing to do in the morning. Their goal was to wait until nightfall to act. She glanced at the sandstorm outside the city, which was now very close to the ruler city. It would probably engulf the entire city before nightfall. And Ling turned the pendant around her neck. This time, it wasn't the target pattern that appeared, but a picture of two small figures. Received prayer pendant bonus. Good things come in pairs. All material drops are doubled. Remaining time, 18 hours, 23 minutes, 23 seconds. This time it's actually good things come in pairs and not always on target. Could it be that, Chapter 89, the final circle? Time flew by, and it was soon afternoon. During this time, Ling and Suyu remained hidden within the building, using their advantageous position to observe the entire city. This island survival game was nearing its end. Ling spent the entire morning not only observing the survivors, but also keeping a close eye on the speed of the sandstorm. Now, the vast expanse of yellow sand was very close to Ruler City. The sandstorm is about to make contact with the protective shield. She lowered her binoculars and stood by the window, quietly watching the overwhelming yellow sand in the distance. The shield should be able to block the sandstorm, right? So you couldn't help but feel a little worried. The survivors were already terrified, and everyone understood that actively taking out others was the fastest way to leave this dreadful place. However, everyone's approach was the same. They chose to hide, clinging to the hope that by surviving until the end, they could still achieve victory. Ultimately, they lacked the strength and the determination to risk their lives, which was precisely why Ling intended to grind monsters. Because this is human nature, it's 6 o'clock in the afternoon. The setting sun was about to dip below the horizon, bringing a touch of coolness to this arid and scorching desert. But at this moment, all the survivors' hearts were in their throats. Because the sandstorm was almost upon them, about to touch the edge of the protective shield. The survivors hiding in the outer city could even clearly feel the surrounding yellow sand blowing against the translucent shield. Inside the building, the two women stood together, their eyes fixed on the edge of the city. The sky darkened early today, and Ling said abruptly. Suyu was stunned for a moment, then reacted. It really did? As the sandstorm was about to touch Ruler City, its speed slowed down strangely. The sun gradually set, and survivors emerged from various parts of the city, cautiously moving towards the city center. At this moment, the earth was completely plunged into darkness. Night had fallen. Accompanying it was the sandstorm engulfing the city. But unlike the violent collision with the protective shield that everyone had imagined, the entire protective shield of Ruler City shut down at this moment. The giant light screen floating in the sky flickered, as if due to insufficient power, and completely disappeared. Dry, Hot wind carrying yellow sand instantly invaded the city. Everyone was taken aback and involuntarily quickened their pace towards the city center. Some even risked being attacked by the two powerful figures in the building, using their charged grappling hooks to travel. But to his surprise, the two powerhouses seemed to have vanished without a trace and didn't attack him, which filled him with overwhelming joy. Of course, Ling and Suyu noticed this guy, but they didn't have time to deal with him. Because in the vision of their charged glasses, under the yellow sand of the outer city, countless monsters had crawled out. They were like zombies, stiffly moving their limbs. Poisonous insects, monsters, and even those gigantic figures, all surged into the city at this moment. The moment the sandstorm made contact with Ruler City's protective shield, it stopped contracting. The entire city, under the cover of darkness, had become a battlefield. The final circle is here. We should move too. And Ling glanced at Suyu. They exchanged glances and nodded, then decisively broke the window and jumped down from the 50th floor. The wind whipped against their cheeks, and the white hair by their ears flew backward. The two were falling at an extremely fast speed. Just then, Suyu felt herself being lifted by a strange force. The speed of their descent began to slow. She turned her head in surprise to look at Ling. Was this her ability? Whoosh! The grappling hook shot out instantly, securely embedding itself in the roof of a building. Then their bodies began to move rapidly towards it. Suyu closed her eyes nervously. Ling wrapped an arm around Suyu's waist, using her ability to absorb the impact, allowing them to land steadily on the roof of this 3-story building. Thank you. Suyu's heart was beating fast. She couldn't believe how daring Ling was. Let's go. We'll gradually approach the outer city. Ling glanced at her and then immediately started traveling with the grappling hook. Apart from the skyscrapers, the surrounding buildings were no more than 6 stories high, which was no problem for Suyu at all. They moved swiftly, constantly shuttling between buildings, and began to approach the outer city. The survivors who noticed them all looked shocked. Are they crazy? Soon, the two arrived at the roof of a 5-story building. The dark mass of monsters was right in front of them. The moment they noticed the two women, they all swarmed towards the building. This small building seemed to be teetering in the tide of monsters. The monsters that couldn't reach the building had no choice but to continue towards the inner city. But many monsters still gathered here, surrounding the building completely. Alright, let's begin. Hopefully, the experience points gained from these monsters won't disappoint us. Ling was full of confidence. Today's good things come in pairs had given her great motivation. Okay. Suyu also nodded and took out her weapon. She wasn't too worried about her own safety. These monsters couldn't climb walls and could only follow the stairs to the top floor, making this a perfect monster grinding spot. Even if they wanted to leave, they could use their grappling hooks to return to the city center and easily eliminate a few survivors to successfully leave the island. Thump, thump, thump. The dense sound of footsteps approached as the monsters frantically moved towards the rooftop. The doorway was small, only allowing one monster to pass through at a time. 2 people dealing with them simultaneously would be less efficient. Suyu, you handle the doorway. I'll attack from below. Ling immediately made arrangements. They would fight together when they couldn't hold on any longer. Of course, they could also choose to switch buildings at any time since these monsters weren't intelligent. Okay. Suyu nodded, taking out her charged crossbow and getting ready. Beside her, Ling was already standing at the edge of the rooftop and began to unleash attacks downwards. Although the charged crossbow had a long attack range, she didn't have always on target today and couldn't guarantee her accuracy. The best approach was to be at close range, facing a dense mass of monsters. Even a fool could hit them then. Red laser arrows flickered continuously in the night, and monsters were pierced and fell into the tide below. Suyu also began her attack, each arrow accurately hitting a monster's head, killing it instantly. The fallen monster corpses blocked the doorway, successfully slowing down the monsters behind them, allowing her to handle the situation with ease. And Ling, those insects are coming. What do we do? Chapter 90. Return. Soon, a dense swarm of poisonous insects arrived. These tiny creatures possessed potent venom, posing a significant threat. Neither Ling nor Suyu had effective area of effect abilities, making these insects particularly troublesome. Ling surveyed the scene and quickly devised a plan. She ripped the charged energy shield from her arm and, with a few swift maneuvers of her flying sword, eliminated the remaining monsters on the rooftop, forcing them back into the stairwell. With a hum, the energy shield expanded. She placed it directly in the stairwell entrance, blocking the influx of all monsters and insects. Taking a pickaxe from her backpack as a support, she firmly wedged the shield in place. Now, the oncoming monsters could only expose their heads, making them easy targets for Suyu, the sharpshooter. And Ling, you're so clever. Suyu was utterly impressed. This way, they no longer needed to worry about the insects. Not yet. And Ling pulled out the remaining gasoline from her backpack, lit it, and threw it down the stairwell along the shield's edges. With a whoosh, a raging fire erupted. The monsters and insects, doused in gasoline, instantly ignited, crackling and popping. The monsters were roughly human-sized, and this level of flame would take a long time to completely incinerate them. However, the insects were different. The flames killed them instantly. The two women, relying on a single building, began their endless monster grind. Both of their experience points surged. A notification popped up in front of Suyu, filling her with delight. And Ling, I leveled up. Don't worry, the night is still young. The more we kill, the better. And Ling encouraged. After confirming they could gain experience points, they became even more motivated. The only drawback of the system was that it didn't display each person's experience points in real time, making it impossible to know how close they were to leveling up. Inside the stairwell, more and more monsters were slain. The corpses piled up at the entrance, forming a small hill. The flames consumed them, gradually spreading and soon engulfing the entire floor. The orange-red flames illuminated the night, transforming the building into a beacon within Ruler City. All the survivors stared in disbelief, unable to fathom how just two people could accomplish such a feat. However, the spreading fire also brought a drawback. The intense heat scorching the walls made them sweat profusely. Simultaneously, the energy shield, resisting the high temperatures, rapidly depleted its power. The two tirelessly slaughtered the monsters, time blurring. Occasionally, screams of survivors echoed from the depths of the city. And Ling knew that time was running out. She only hoped these people would be smart and survive a little longer. And Ling, the shield's power is almost gone. Suyu stared at the energy shield at the entrance, its power indicator now red, the light screen growing faint. Batteries were crucial for them, and she didn't plan to recharge the shield. Give me your shield. And Ling immediately turned around. Her flying sword, like a streak of light, swiftly darted into the gap between the stairwell and the shield, wreaking havoc within. She deactivated the shield and immediately replaced it with Suyu's. Their plan continued. Monsters fell one after another, but their numbers were insignificant compared to the overwhelming horde. They seemed endless. And Ling suspected they wouldn't disappear before dawn. But this was the final circle. Perhaps dawn wouldn't even come. The charged crossbow's power was gradually decreasing. To conserve battery, they even abandoned their charged glasses, relying solely on the light from the burning building to observe their surroundings. Notifications of survivors being killed popped up, making them anxious, but the occasional ability level up filled them with ecstasy. Late into the night, and Ling saw a notification pop up and smiled. She checked her charged crossbow and found it still had some power left, with 3 batteries remaining. She decided to give them all to Suyu. These are for you. You have limited arrows, and you won't last long once these charged weapons run out of power. Ah, okay. Suyu didn't hesitate. She understood her limitations. And Ling was different. She still had her sword. Lend me 2 crossbow bolts. And Ling spoke again. Without thinking, Suyu took the metal bolts for her compound crossbow from her backpack. Before she could hand them over, the 2 bolts levitated in midair, transforming into 2 black streaks of light that shot downwards. Whoosh, whoosh. The bolts zipped through the monster horde, easily piercing their chests. Suyu watched in astonishment. They were on the 6th floor. As far as she knew, and Ling's ability didn't have such a long range, and she could only control 1 target at a time. That's right, her ability had also leveled up. Indeed, the power is much weaker compared to the sword. And Ling said, observing the scene below, deep in thought. If these 2 bolts were swords, even at such a distance, they could easily pierce the monsters' heads instead of targeting their vulnerable chests like these bolts. Moreover, swords could cut. The iron sword in her hand also rose into the air, joining the two metal bolts on the battlefield. Now, all she had to do was stand there and control the three weapons to slaughter the monsters below. With Ling's batteries, Suyu no longer needed to worry about running out of power. Their situation was excellent. Countless dead monsters provided them with intangible experience points, helping them level up quickly. Time, midnight. Ling's good things come in pairs blessing disappeared at this moment. Just as she was about to turn her pendant, a notification popped up from the light screen ring on her right hand. Current teams remaining, 25. Victory conditions met. Leaving Death Wasteland. Countdown, 10, 9, 8. Instantly, the surrounding monsters turned into black smoke and completely vanished, leaving only the fire below continuing to burn. Ling and Suyu looked at each other and smiled. It was a pleasure knowing you, my friend. Likewise. The moment Suyu finished her reply, the world spun around them. The surrounding scenery shifted and disappeared. After a moment of disorientation, Ling opened her eyes. She saw a wooden ceiling, felt the damp air, and the salty sea breeze blowing through the window. She sat up from the floor and rubbed her slightly dizzy head. I'm back. Chapter 91. Jet Lag. Island name, Desert of Death. Clearance time, 5 days. Clearance rating, S. Rewards, upgrade card *3, points *200. Additional rewards, points *50 for killing the Dominator, points *12 for killing professionals, points *750 for killing puppets. Countdown to next island, 14 days, 23 hours, 58 minutes. Thankfully, the time before the next survival island has increased. Now I have half a month to develop in peace. Ling breathed a sigh of relief and closed the settlement rewards screen. Judging from the settlement experience of the first island, upgrade cards were issued after profession cards, and the monsters she killed in the desert were also a type of puppet. Ling put down her backpack and began to organize the materials she had acquired. Most of them were food, with very few special rewards, far less than the system's settlement rewards. She took out a thick stack of cards, at least 4 or 5 centimeters high, the height of 2 decks of playing cards combined. These were 104 foundation cards she had harvested from a large warehouse in a small town. They had only one use, to expand her own island. Ling didn't hesitate to use all the cards. The island's area instantly underwent a dramatic change, expanding from the original 29 square meters to the current 133 square meters, more than quadrupling in size. The area around the island became spacious, and her mood improved as well. While 133 square meters seemed large at first glance, it was actually only equivalent to a 3-bedroom apartment. After organizing the materials, Ling's gaze fell on the small piece of beef she had previously placed on the wooden table. Picking it up, it wasn't rotten. She brought the beef to her nose and sniffed it carefully. There was no foul odor either. This beef hasn't spoiled? A strange look appeared on Ling's face. Now, there was only one explanation. The time spent on the survival island and the construction island were completely different and didn't interfere with each other. Otherwise, in such a hot environment, this piece of beef couldn't possibly not rot in 5 days, let alone not have even a hint of a bad smell. Strangely, however, both the stove and the furnace had run out of fuel and stopped working. Perhaps, after she entered the survival island, time here would continue to run, but there should be a threshold. As for how long, Ling didn't know. After casually tossing the beef into the sea, she began to restart her equipment. The smelting of iron couldn't stop. She wanted to wait until she had the heavenly luck blessing again to forge a wave of weapons and tools, completely upgrading her equipment. Speaking of which, I haven't used today's blessing yet. She habitually rotated the pendant around her neck and looked out at the dark night sky. Received blessing pendant bonus. Unbelievable luck. Right now, you are the luckiest of the luckiest. Remaining time, 19 hours, 29 minutes, 30 seconds. What? Ling exclaimed in surprise. It's already 4:30. She remembered leaving the island at midnight sharp. 5 days there might have only been less than 5 hours here. But regardless of the time, her body still gave her the feedback that she hadn't slept all night, reminding her to rest. I didn't expect to have jet lag. Ling was a little helpless. Today's blessing was unbelievable luck, and she had to make good use of it. But not now. She took food out of the box and began to prepare supper, or rather, breakfast. Soon, a plate of shredded ginger potatoes and a plate of stir-fried beef with scallions were served, paired with freshly steamed rice. It was incredibly delicious. Ling hadn't eaten a hot meal for many days, only consuming instant food. After satisfying her hunger, she went to the outdoor shower cabin, took off her clothes, and prepared to take a bath. In the 5 days in the desert of death, there was no way to shower. Coupled with the hot environment, constant exercise, and killing, it had made her feel incredibly uncomfortable. Ling stood naked in the shower cabin, looking at herself in the mirror. At this moment, she had already lost the initial sense of shyness. The shyness of a girl seeing her own body was completely gone, let alone the fact that this was her own body. Perhaps killing too many people had made her somewhat numb. Fair skin, a curvy figure, shoulder-length white hair casually draped down her back. There were many black mud stains on her body, along with some red ones. These were splattered from killing monsters and survivors. Ling's sharp eyes met her own reflection in the mirror, and she even remembered the naive and ignorant look she had at the beginning. After a moment, she turned on the showerhead and began to rinse her body. The cloudy bathwater flowed down her snow-white skin, into the cabin's floor drain, and then into the sea. Chapter 92. An Outrageous Architect? Ling woke up at 11 o'clock in the morning. Beads of sweat already dotted her forehead, a testament to the scorching heat outside. She sat up, breathing in the humid air. Why is it so hot? Although she didn't have a thermometer, she was absolutely certain that the temperature outside had already reached over 30 degrees Celsius. The ventilation inside the wooden cabin was decent, but the lack of air circulation, combined with the absence of any cooling facilities and the 2 burning furnaces, made the interior even hotter than outside, like a steaming basket. Ling collected the refined iron ingots, then refilled the charcoal and iron ore in the furnaces. Stepping out onto the island, the intense heat radiating from the sun above scorched her skin, causing a stinging sensation. She was puzzled. It hadn't been this hot before. If she were to stand by the sea and fish in this weather, she'd probably get heat stroke and pass out before nightfall. And fainting alone on a deserted island meant death. Unable to bear it, Ling quickly retreated into the wooden cabin. Although it was still hot, at least she wasn't directly exposed to the sun. I have a feeling I missed something while I was sleeping. Confused, she opened her light screen. There were 4 unread messages, all sent in the morning. One was a private message from Suyu, along with a friend request. Another was a private message from Chan Rue, and the remaining 2 were unread notifications from the system. Compared to the former, the system's messages were obviously more important. Perhaps they could explain the sudden heat wave. Global announcement. Survivors, we believe you have all adapted to life on the island. To add some spice to this mundane existence, starting today, each time you enter a survival island, you will encounter a form of severe weather. Enjoy. As expected, after becoming an ability user, the difficulty of survival would decrease significantly. The system obviously wouldn't let us have it easy. Ling felt a headache coming on. She was still stuck in the primitive stage of development, and her life was about to become incredibly tedious. She didn't want to die from heat stroke. Closing that message, she opened the next one. Current event, blazing sun, duration, until entering the next survival island, description. A colossal sun gazes down upon all beings, witnessing the growth of every survivor. The sun will not set, and the temperature will gradually rise to over 40 degrees Celsius, continuing until the event ends. As Ling read this message, 2 question marks and an exclamation point instantly popped up in her mind. No sunset? Isn't that a polar day? The key point was that the temperature would increase to 40 degrees Celsius. This was no joke. People could actually die from the heat. This is troublesome. She closed the message, a rare frown appearing on her face. At least the current temperature hadn't reached over 40 degrees yet. This was probably to give unprepared survivors some time to prepare. She accepted Suyu's friend request and opened her private message. Suyu and Ling, I got incredibly rich rewards this time. My island area has expanded several times. 20 minutes later. Suyu, what the hell kind of event is this? Why do we have to deal with this even after returning to the island? I give up. I was wondering why it was so hot. It was just Suyu venting. And Ling shook her head and chuckled, feeling a bit helpless. And Ling, right now, the only thing to do is to try and see if we can find a solution on the resource island. This was her first time experiencing this event, and her mind was still a bit blank. The current survivors were all those who had survived the second island. At this point, food and water were no longer scarce for them, so the system had come up with other troubles for them. Suyu, sigh. This system isn't very user-friendly at all. There's no team function. Living alone on an island will eventually turn us into cavemen. It's so boring. And Ling, it's not a big deal. If you can't survive, you just die. No attachments, nothing to worry about. Their conversation was purely idle chatter, asking about the development and living conditions on each other's islands. Living alone on an island was extremely boring, and having a friend to talk to and relieve boredom was a good thing. After all, humans are social creatures. Unless you're a recluse with a peculiar personality, you probably can't tolerate this kind of solitude. As for Chen Rue, and Ling had once considered him a good-for-nothing. Although he was similar to her before she transmigrated, at least here, she had long since changed and adapted to the environment, while he remained the same. This was why Ling had gradually communicated less with him. However, his first sentence couldn't help but make her look at this timid boy in a new light. Chen Rue, sis, I became a professional. Chen Rue, I luckily got it on the second survival island. I accidentally found a hidden mission. This mission actually had me dismantle all the red and blue wire bombs in a room and escape. This happens to be the field I understand. Although I haven't tried it in person, this stuff is the easiest to dismantle. I did it effortlessly. That's right. Since he had managed to survive the second island, it was enough to prove that there were aspects to him that Ling hadn't seen before. Ling, what profession is it? Can you tell me? Chen Rue, it's one of the 4 major professions, the architect. I heard they are very rare. Maybe my luck is pretty good. Ling, the 4 major professions? Chen Rue, sis, you don't know? These 4 professions are basic professions: transcendents, evolvers, beast tamers, and architects. Ling, this profession sounds like a support class? Chen Rue, that's right. It doesn't have any combat power itself. You have to make your own equipment and weapons, so it's very weak in the early stages without any resources. Hearing this, Ling seemed to understand his intentions. He had sought her out perhaps to unite or form a team with her. After all, this was just a logistical profession, very weak in the early stages. What was the use of just being able to build things? He was a complete burden. Ling was about to politely refuse his request as soon as he made it, but before she could reply, Chen Rue's message came again. Chen Rue, I got a little off topic, sis. I mainly wanted to tell you that my profession is different from the other 3 major professions. It has its own dedicated resource island where you can choose to obtain certain resources, such as charcoal, sulfur, saltpeter, and wood ash. In other words, I can make bullets for you. Ling, what? Chapter 93. Upgrading the Wooden Cabin. Ling was stunned when she read that message, barely able to believe what Chen Rue was saying. Was this profession really that outrageous? If he could get his hands on those raw materials, then manufacturing gunpowder wouldn't be difficult. As for the remaining metal processing, as long as there were tools, it would be possible. Since he was an ability user, he must have some unique abilities, so this wouldn't be a problem either. Ling, are you sure you're not joking? Chen Rue, sis, do I look like I'm joking? Ling, if you can make bullets, can you also make other firearms? Chen Rue, theoretically, yes, but my ability level is still very low at the moment. I can only make some simple things. Ling was stunned. She hadn't expected this profession to be so overpowered. Firearms were a nightmare for the current ability users. As for what level one needed to reach to resist bullets, she wasn't sure herself. At least, not yet Ling. So it's a late-game profession, as expected. Chen Rue, that's what I think too. Resources are scarce in the early stages, so the role I can play is actually very limited. Ling, congratulations. At least in this world, you have a certain degree of self-protection. Chen Rue, sis, I'll leave it at that for now. I'll send you something good tonight. Ling thought for a moment after reading the chat log, replied with okay, and then closed the light screen. There were no buildings she could construct, nor could she improve her current living conditions. She was already starting to feel troubled. Oh right, I almost forgot today is Fortune's favor. She slapped her forehead, finally remembering. Before entering the survival island last time, she had deliberately left a few chests unopened, waiting for the next time luck was on her side before opening them. Now was the perfect time. There were 10 locked chests, but only 5 keys, and Ling opened them all without hesitation. Besides some food harvest, fortune's favor certainly didn't disappoint her. The special rewards were 2 building cards and 1 enhancement card. And Ling picked up the 2 purple building cards and examined them separately. One depicted a pavilion, which made her extremely happy. The other was a gray, semicircular structure. She couldn't tell what it was. Pavilion building card. Shade from the sun and shelter from the rain. A must-have for your home. Building materials required. Wood 50, nails 40, thatch 30, plastic 30. Points earned 3. Kiln building card. Burn soil to make bricks. Add tiles to your house. Building materials required. Scrap iron 40, lust 20. Points earned 3. So it's a kiln. And Ling realized. She had all the materials required to build both structures, so she didn't hesitate to build them. She placed the pavilion near the sea, so it could provide shelter from the wind and rain outside, and also prevent her from being sunburned, allowing her to fish for supplies smoothly. As for the kiln, and Ling placed it next to the furnace. This semicircular gray structure had an arched entrance at the bottom for adding fuel, and the other side was for adding raw materials. With the materials added, both furnaces started working nonstop. Now I have an enhancement card in my hand, and Ling pondered, where should I use it? She looked around her small wooden cabin and finally decided to use it to improve her quality of life. Enhancing mining equipment was the least cost-effective. It only slightly increased mining efficiency and would beat Ed as development progressed, thus wasting the enhancement card. As for weapons, her iron sword was a golden legendary item, so there was even less need to enhance it. The pistol couldn't be enhanced either, and besides, she lacked bullets, not firepower. Therefore, Ling finally decided to enhance her rickety, simple wooden bed. The blue card in her hand disappeared instantly, and the wooden bed in front of her changed in the same moment. It became a solid wood single bed, no different from a modern wooden single bed, and it came with a mattress. The bed was much larger than before, and the headboard was nearly half a meter high, with a layer of padding on top, allowing her to lean against it while in bed. On top of the mattress were the previous layers of wool felt mat, cowhide, and a thin mattress. With all these things stacked together, she couldn't feel the hard bed boards at all. And Ling was very satisfied looking at all this. Currently, her island wasn't lacking in resources. The only thing she needed was to improve her living facilities. She went outside the wooden cabin and decisively spent 670 points, exchanging them for 67 foundation cards. She then used them all to expand her island area again. Current island area, 200 square meters, remaining points, 353. Just to make it a round number. And Ling looked at the width of her island, which had now reached over 14 meters. It couldn't be more spacious in this way. Only the 10 square meter coffin-like wooden cabin seemed a bit cramped. She took out the 2 red and blue cards in her hand and walked towards her wooden cabin. That's right. And Ling was going to enhance her small wooden cabin. But before that, she needed to move the facilities next to the wooden cabin away to prevent them from being included during the enhancement process. After doing all this, she pointed the card at the wooden cabin, and as the blue enhancement card in her hand disappeared, the area of the wooden cabin instantly doubled, reaching 20 square meters. And Ling couldn't help but feel a little disappointed when she saw this. It seems I need to prepare a few more enhancement cards before enhancing the wooden cabin next time. Meanwhile, she poked her head into the wooden cabin. To be honest, the 20 square meters area wasn't large, just equivalent to a small bedroom, so there was still only one room inside. However, her wooden interior was now incomplete due to the expansion of the wooden cabin, causing some areas of the floor to be exposed as grass. After patching these wooden boards, she used the upgrade card she had in hand. As she had guessed, the wooden house was unsurprisingly transformed directly into a brick house. However, the appearance really left Ling somewhat speechless. The upgrade card only upgraded the wooden house into a brick house, but it didn't include any decoration. The outer walls were layers of red bricks piled up, with the cement in the gaps clearly visible. From the outside, it looked incredibly dilapidated, even less attractive than the previous wooden house. Fortunately, the interior had wooden decoration. The 4 walls were covered with wooden boards, making it look much more comfortable than the outside. As for the door, it was still wooden, and the windows were the glass windows upgraded before. There were no changes. This upgrade clearly excluded them. Looking at the house that was no different from before on the inside, and Ling was speechless. So, the function of upgrading this house was just to make it a little sturdier? Chapter 94. Separating ability users and survivors? The larger area was due to the enhancement card. Logically, the upgrade card should have a stronger effect. And Ling didn't understand. She was a little frustrated, feeling like the upgrade card had been wasted. But when she took out the other two upgrade cards and prepared to use them, she found that the wooden cabin, no, it should be a brick house now, no longer had the upgrade option. Strange, it can't be upgraded anymore? But Ling didn't think much of it, because she hadn't planned on wasting another upgrade card on it anyway. As for other facilities, such as the furnace and storage boxes, although they were also important, they were still usable for now, so they weren't a priority. Compared to her most important survival environment, the next most important thing was her boat. Her gaze turned to the wooden boat rocking with the waves by the sea. This was an essential tool for venturing out to collect supplies, and it was also her second survival base besides the house. The wooden boat was just as important to Ling. Without it, relying solely on the ordinary supplies salvaged from the island would make technological development very slow. Good cards should be used where they are most needed. She jumped onto the wooden boat and used both upgrade cards on it. As the cards disappeared, the wooden boat instantly underwent a transformation. The body of the boat was slightly larger than before, but not by much, and the interior space became much brighter. The biggest change was the storage box at the bow of the boat, which had been upgraded from physical storage to spatial storage. Seeing this, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. I thought I was going to waste another upgrade card. This upgrade and the previous wooden cabin upgrade were both significantly different from Ling's own expectations. She had expected the wooden cabin to be upgraded to a brick house, but she hadn't expected it to look like this. And for the wooden boat in front of her, she had even thought that after the upgrade, there would be a mast and sails. Clearly, she had been let down by those damn game developers. The last upgrade card was used on the hand crank propeller at the stern of the boat, and this upgrade didn't disappoint her, because a large black panel covering the stern was telling her that it was now solar-powered, having been converted from manual to electric, which was incredibly convenient. And Ling took out the last card she had, a positioning card she had redeemed from the system store, and inserted it into the positioning navigator. A light on the screen began to flash. Soon, a prompt appeared. Positioning successful, resource island coordinates, 4867. Everything is becoming so reasonable. Just from this short effort, Ling was already drenched in sweat, so she quickly returned to her house to seek shade. Feeling the protest from her stomach, she glanced at the time. It was almost noon. Time for lunch. But the extremely hot weather made her dehydrated, and she had no appetite at all, but she had to eat even if she didn't feel like it. The furnace indoors had already been extinguished, and Ling didn't want to start a fire and cook, so she had no choice but to eat some instant food to fill her stomach. After rummaging around, she actually found that she still had a watermelon from the last resource island. Ling couldn't wait to cut the watermelon into several pieces and started eating. After finishing lunch, it was afternoon. She had originally planned to take the wooden boat to the resource island, but now there was only one day of exploration time on the island, and it was already afternoon. Thinking of this, Ling suddenly froze. The resource island prompt said it would sink into the sea at night. But what happens now that there is no night? Wouldn't it be a complete day, 24 hours? She seemed to have discovered a bug, but to verify the truth, she would have to wait until night. The positioning navigator's function was only to locate the resource island. There was no time requirement. Unless the island disappeared, the coordinates on it wouldn't disappear. As for the island landing time, it was calculated from the moment the survivor set foot on the island, so the system was still relatively user-friendly. As for what Ling was going to do now, it was simple: sleep. She would sleep until night, verifying the non-setting sun while also checking if the drifting supplies on the sea would disappear. If they didn't disappear, then the resource island wouldn't sink into the sea either. By ensuring enough sleep, she would have more energy to explore the resource island and gather supplies in the next 24 hours. Ling simply rinsed her body, filled the furnace and kiln with supplies and fuel, and then lay down in bed to sleep. Although she didn't cover herself with a blanket while sleeping, she was still awakened by the high temperature a few hours later. Even the bedsheet was soaked with sweat. It's too hot, How can I sleep like this? And Ling sat up abruptly, giving up the idea of continuing to sleep, and glanced at the time on her pendant. It was just past 5 o'clock. Pushing open the door, she looked at the sky and couldn't help but squint. The huge, scorching sun was still hanging high overhead, radiating intense heat. It hadn't moved an inch. It was even worse than a polar day. Whether it was an illusion or not, and Ling felt that the temperature in the afternoon was even higher than in the morning, and the sky was clear blue with not a single cloud. It was impossible to encounter the previous stormy weather again, but of course, she hadn't expected the system to be lenient. With nothing else to do while waiting for night to fall, and Ling picked up her fishing rod, walked over to the pavilion, and started fishing. Compared to others who were fishing for supplies in the scorching sun, risking heat stroke, her situation was much better. Ding dong. At that moment, the system notification sounded. Someone had sent her a private message. She originally thought it was Chen Rue, but when she opened the light screen to check, it was Qin Xiao. Qin Xiao, I discovered some information. After extensive investigation and verification, it has high credibility. Qin Xiao, have you ever thought that every time after entering the survival island, the people who come out alive are elites? Even if they haven't become ability users, they are definitely not ordinary people. And Ling, you mean the difficulty of the islands will become higher and higher? Isn't that obvious? Qin Xiao, no, it's our difficulty that will become higher and higher. Becoming a professional is a one-way street. Those ordinary people who survive the beginner islands, with their low ratings, their second island is still a beginner island, but the way to pass it is different. And Ling's expression froze when she saw this. She understood what Qin Xiao wanted to express. And Ling, I really haven't noticed this before. It seems like we professionals are more like deliberately screened out by the system. Qin Xiao, not only that, the ordinary people encountered on the second island are basically elites, but they seem powerless against ability users. Of course, luck is also a part of strength, so we can't rule out that a large part is due to luck. Qin Xiao, but what I want to say is that after the second island ends, those survivors who still haven't become ability users will only have a 7-day interval before their third island. And Ling, you mean, the system will differentiate between ordinary people and professionals on the next island, and the third island will likely be a confrontation entirely between ability users? Chapter 95. The Unsetting Sun and Another Resource Island Exploration. Qin Xiao, the credibility is very high. Prepare early. And Ling, thanks for letting me know. Here's a watermelon for you. She ran back to the cabin and sent the remaining half of her watermelon to Qin Xiao. His information was indeed crucial, and after thinking it over, she felt bad about getting it for free, so she offered a small gesture of gratitude. If it was true as he speculated, things would become troublesome. The next island would turn into a battleground for ability users. However, the most worrisome thing was those awakened ones. They were the most troublesome. And Ling opened her personal information, a sneer appearing on her face. Name, and Ling profession, Swordmaster. Level, Blue Horse. Cleanliness, 76%. Fullness, 65%. Physical condition, healthy. Current points, 353. I'm afraid I won't have enough pistol bullets then. Ordinary people are always stuck on the lower level islands, while ability users are like climbing a tower, gradually ascending. She murmured, closing the light screen and sitting down. With a forceful swing, she cast her fishing line, casually hooking a piece of wood. Time quickly reached past 7 o'clock. The giant sun in the sky remained motionless, and the drifting supplies in the sea hadn't disappeared. Ling understood. Rather than saying the sun wouldn't set, it was more like there was no night now. This meant that the resource island wouldn't sink at this time. Having obtained the answer she wanted, she packed up everything and set off on the wooden boat towards the resource island. Although the propeller was now upgraded to solar-powered, the speed increase wasn't significant compared to the hand-crank version. The upside was that Ling no longer needed to expend stamina and ability power. She sat leisurely in the boat's shelter, feeling the hot wind generated by the slow movement of the boat, which provided a slight sense of coolness. More than 3 hours later, the time reached 10 o'clock at night, and the island finally appeared in sight. It really hasn't sunk into the sea. And Ling shielded her eyes with her hand, looking at the island in the distance with a delighted expression. It didn't look much different from the previous resource island. The overall terrain was uneven, covered with dense vegetation, full of trees and weeds. As for what the island was like inside, she didn't know. This time, having learned from her previous experience, Ling planned to first circle the island by boat and choose a favorable location before landing. However, just as she had circled halfway around the island, she suddenly froze. There was a wooden raft parked on the beach in the distance. Ling knew very well what this meant. She immediately began to observe the surrounding area, and after making sure she hadn't been discovered, she steered the boat to a hidden spot and landed. Resource Island remaining exploration time. One day, the light screen prompt appeared. It seemed that the strategy of waiting for the rabbit was not going to work, so Ling simply landed on the island. It never said anything about two survivors landing on the same resource island at the same time. She murmured, cautiously approaching the wooden raft. The other survivor wouldn't have anticipated this, so they wouldn't have deliberately hidden their tracks. As long as she followed the clues, finding them wouldn't be difficult. If she wanted to explore this resource island properly, she had to eliminate the other survivor first. Beyond the few-meter-wide beach was dense grassland. The weeds here grew almost as tall as a person, and there were tall trees all around. This resource island looked more like an island specifically for survivors to obtain wood and food. However, due to the high temperature and scorching sun, the vegetation looked somewhat wilted. Found it. Ling glanced at the grass in front of her. There were signs of someone having trampled through it, and she decisively followed the trail towards the interior of the island. This resource island was slightly larger than the previous one. Ling estimated it would take nearly half a day to cross it on foot. However, there were no roads, the terrain was somewhat rugged, the plants obstructed her view, and there was a risk of getting lost, so her progress would be much slower. As Ling gradually went deeper, she soon found bloodstains on the ground, left by butchered prey. Only the internal organs remained, and she couldn't tell what kind of creature it was. The surrounding area was still filled with endless trees and vegetation, with no change at all. Strange, does this resource island only have trees? Ling raised her eyebrows slightly, feeling a little surprised. Logically, a resource island shouldn't be so simple. She wasn't lacking wood, nor food. She continued to follow the trail for another half hour, but aside from not finding the other survivor, there was still nothing worthwhile around, which made her quite worried. But just as she pushed aside the tall weeds in front of her, a downward-sloping cave entrance appeared. The entrance was more than 1 meter wide and less than 2 meters high, and the inside was pitch black. At first, Ling thought it might be some monster's lair, but the trail disappeared here, and it was clear that the other survivor had entered the cave and hadn't come out yet. The environment inside was dark, and she didn't know the specific situation. The best course of action now was to wait here and ambush them, but she couldn't be sure how big the cave was or if there were other exits. Ling crouched down, waiting quietly by the cave entrance. The surroundings became silent. Suddenly, she faintly heard a weak sound coming from inside the cave. As her ability level increased, her 5 senses became sharper, and she was certain she hadn't misheard. Ah, so good. Too bad it's just a piece of pork. If only it were the real thing. It was a man's voice, rough and belonging to someone likely in their 30s or 40s, engaging in an indecent act with a piece of pork. Clearly, the internal organs Ling encountered earlier were from a wild boar hunted by the other survivor. A moment later, a clanging sound came from inside the cave. This sound was loud, and the echo it created within the cave reached Ling's ears clearly. There are actually minerals in there. A smile finally appeared on her face. At least this trip wouldn't be in vain. Ling decided to enter the cave now and take advantage of this free labor. Chapter 96. Free Labor. Judging by the sound, the space inside this cave should be quite large, with the source at least tens of meters away from the entrance. Ling didn't care if her clothes were dirty or not. She activated her ability to the fullest and burrowed into the cave. Sha-sha. The surrounding soil cascaded down with her. After a moment, her feet stood firmly on the ground. The wave of coolness instantly surged through her body, bringing her unprecedented comfort. The cave was dark, damp, and exceptionally cool, a stark contrast to the outside environment. The space inside the cave was larger than expected, about 1.8 meters high and 1 meter wide. It was clearly man-made. She glanced back at the slanting entrance behind her. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the area near the opening, but due to the angle, it couldn't reach the bottom. The distance was visually estimated to be nearly 10 meters. And Ling gently patted the dirt off her clothes and fully activated her ability for exploration. It was her only reliance in the darkness. Clang, clang. The hammering sound continued from the depths of the cave. The person hadn't noticed her. Although there were many passages in the cave, following the sound would quickly lead her to the source. Her black leather shoes stepped on the damp soil without making a sound. And Ling was like a ghost in the night, slowly approaching the other person. After passing another fork in the passage, she finally saw a red firelight emanating from one of the cave openings. As she had guessed, it was a middle-aged man in his 30s or 40s, disheveled and unshaven. He was shirtless, diligently digging for iron ore, completely unaware of the person silently standing at the entrance of the passage behind him. Seeing a piece of red and white pork on the ground, a flicker of disgust flashed through in Ling's eyes. She spoke with a gentle smile. "How's the harvest today?" "Ha ha ha, not bad. If only." The pickaxe the big man was swinging froze in midair, and he abruptly stiffened. "Too bad. Why didn't you come earlier?" "I've lost all interest in women now," the big man reacted, hearing a woman's voice behind him and laughing happily. A girl here, with him. Wasn't that just a lamb waiting to be slaughtered? But the moment he turned around and saw Ling in the firelight, he instantly trembled, his expression shifting from excitement to fear. Cult-level ability user. This instinctive exclamation piqued Ling's interest and made her next actions much easier. She said playfully, "You can tell my level?" "Big sis." "No, little girl." No, beauty. Meeting is fate. I'll leave right away. Spare my life." The big man immediately cowered, all traces of lewdness vanishing from his face. "You haven't answered my question." Ling took out her weapon, her tone already showing impatience. I'm also a professional. My ability is insight. I can distinguish ordinary people from ability users through sight," the big man quickly explained, his gaze shifty, lowering his head and not daring to look directly at the girl in front of him. This ability was interesting, not quite useless, but utterly impractical. And Ling had never encountered a professional with absolutely no offensive power before. "How far is your island from here?" she asked again. The other person's vehicle was a small wooden raft, so the distance was likely closer than hers. "I don't know. I left after lunch, so I don't know how much time has passed," the big man explained. That was true. The light screen didn't show the time, and most survivors didn't have watches to calculate time. He couldn't really say how long he had been rowing the raft. But Ling could roughly judge the distance based on his information. It should be closer than the distance from her construction island to here. "Throw your backpack over." Ling pointed to the backpack at his feet. The big man didn't dare to refuse and obediently picked up his bag. The moment he touched the backpack, his eyes turned sinister. A long knife suddenly appeared in his hand. He hurled the backpack with all his might, his muscles bulging, and instantly lunged towards Ling. "If you won't let me live, then don't think you'll live either," he roared. Although his ability wasn't offensive, it could enhance his physical strength. In such a confined space, he was confident he had a chance to kill her. She was just an ability user. It wasn't like he hadn't killed one before. But the plan was perfect, while reality was cruel. An iron sword floated in midair, pointing at his throat. The big man's body instantly froze, his knife-swinging motion halted, and he dared not make any rash moves. Gulp! He swallowed hard, a trace of embarrassment appearing on his face. "Ahem. Beauty, I saw you were so cute. I was just joking with you just now." He had seen with his own eyes the backpack he had thrown at her stop in midair and then slowly float into her hand. "Do you think this joke is funny?" Ling lowered her head and boldly rummaged through his backpack, not even looking directly at the big man. After transferring all the ore and food into her own backpack, she unexpectedly found a strengthening card inside, a pleasant surprise. The remaining items were of no value, and Ling casually tossed the backpack aside. She had searched high and low, only to find it effortlessly. She hadn't wasted so much time in vain. As expected, freeloading was the best. "Behave, or I don't mind sending you to reunite with your great-grandmother." Ling withdrew the flying sword in front of him. The other party immediately knelt on the ground. Truly, a great man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. I understand. I'll be your workhorse." The big man lowered his head and spoke in a frightened tone. Now he really had no other thoughts. The strength gap between them was too vast to bridge. In that case, how much or is still left here? Dig it all out. And Ling felt she was being too generous, actually letting go of a survivor who had tried to kill her. Beauty, after I dig it all, can you let me live? Upon hearing that he was being asked to do the work, the big man's tense nerves relaxed slightly. Stop wasting my time and get to it. And Ling blurted out, cursing at him. Wait, why my time, and not my time? Referring to the change in pronoun, implying a sudden shift in her usual demeanor. Right away, right away. The big man immediately picked up the pickaxe from the ground with fear and trepidation and ran to the edge of the cave, starting to hammer away with a clang. Of course, Ling wouldn't be idle either. After all, two people were more efficient, but her weapon was stuck at the entrance of the cave, specifically to deter him. Chapter 97. Are you touched? Within a few hours, the two of them had finished mining all the ore in the cave. Ling unceremoniously stuffed all the materials into her backpack. Good job. Then, can I go now? The big man looked at her cold face with a mixture of fear and hope. What's the rush? How much exploration time do you have left? Ling walked to the cave entrance, casually pulled out her weapon, and used her ability to sense the surrounding environment. The big man didn't dare to lie, as the exploration time was displayed on the light screen. He opened it and glanced at it. 16 hours left. Lead the way. Ling pointed her sword at another cave entrance not far away. The big man had no choice but to pick up the torch from the ground and walk ahead. He understood that she intended to use him, this free labor, to the very end. But this was still the best possible outcome. At least he would survive. This underground cave was intricate and complex, with various passages crisscrossing each other, like a giant ant nest. Fortunately, it was man-made. Some passages had clear markings, and since it was a mine, there should be plenty of resources that, of course. At least that's what Ling thought at the moment. After mining, or in two more caves, the two of them continued deeper into the passage, finally arriving at a relatively spacious underground plaza. In the center sat a golden wooden treasure chest. We've reached the center of the island so quickly? Ling murmured. The last two caves were much smaller than the first, so they hadn't wasted that much time overall. Just then, a pair of glowing green eyes suddenly appeared in the darkness ahead, followed by a four-legged, tusked monster emerging. With a clatter, the torch in the big man's hand fell to the ground in fright. He was at a loss. Whoosh! A flying sword whizzed past him, its sharp blade even slicing a gash in his clothes. Splurt! The sharp iron sword pierced into the monster's flesh, easily slicing its body in half. What was that thing? Ling walked forward, her sword flying back into her hand. The little monster guarding the treasure chest on this resource island was more show than substance, no different from the puppets on the survival islands. The treasure chest, like last time, was locked, but this time, Ling simply slashed down with her sword, easily destroying it. Opening the chest, the reward inside was surprisingly meager, only a skill card. There was no need to keep it. She decisively used it, and her swordsmanship skill reached level 3. Let's keep going, she said. The big man behind her paused, then quickly picked up the torch from the ground. Oh, okay. Apparently, he hadn't recovered from the shock yet. The two of them continued exploring the underground cave, one in front of the other. Just then, a private message from Chun Rue came in. Sis, I'm sending you something good. I've already traded it over. Remember to accept? Okay, thanks. And Ling replied simply. She was still outside, so she didn't accept it immediately or check what it was. She would wait until she returned to her construction island. It wasn't going anywhere anyway. Current loot: iron or 110, copper or 34, coal or *35. Without the great luck blessing, this harvest was already very good. After all, their tools were too crude, and their mining efficiency was low, which meant they'd wasted a lot of ore. As mentioned before, this cave was man-made, so most of the mining tunnels had already been excavated. There was actually very little left for Ling to mine. 2 hours later, a light appeared at the end of a tunnel ahead. They had reached the exit. The hot, humid air assaulted the ground, and the scorching heat was oppressive. Ling patted the dirt off her clothes and surveyed the surroundings, trying to determine the exact location of the island. This island can't just be trees and weeds, can it? The iron sword transformed into a stream of light, swiftly flying forward like a lawnmower, quickly cutting down a large swath of weeds and clearing a path forward. Trees, weeds. These things were completely useless to her. There weren't any fruit trees either, and crucially, she wasn't short on food at the moment. The two of them continued straight ahead, and soon, their footprints crisscrossed the entire island, reaching the seaside. That's it? This is a scam? The big man behind her also felt relieved. Now he could finally leave. Beauty, I only have a few hours of exploration time left. I should go. All right then. And Ling readily agreed. There wasn't anything on this island anyway, and she didn't want to waste any more time. She had observed the compass on her way here, so even though she was suddenly in an unfamiliar environment, she could still tell the direction. The big man didn't expect her to agree so readily and was immediately overjoyed. As long as he could leave this place smoothly, the world was vast, and he could fly as high as he wanted. You don't know the direction, do you? I have a compass. I'll take you to find your raft first. And Ling looked harmless as she turned her back to the big man and waved the compass in her hand. The big man paused. He really couldn't tell the direction at the moment. If he got lost inside and didn't leave the island in the remaining time, it would be troublesome. Then thank you, Beauty. No need to thank me. After all, you helped me a lot. Anyway, there's nothing on this island, and I'm leaving too. And Ling said with a relaxed expression, then used her ability to actively clear the path ahead. The big man was ecstatic. Such a powerful ability user was actually a national curse word, implying foolishness. As expected, beauties with sweet voices were easy to deceive. Along the way, both of them were very quiet, and no one spoke first. And Ling observed the surrounding environment while clearing the weeds, but she was disappointed. There really was nothing here. Soon, they traversed the entire island through the overgrown jungle and returned to the place where they had landed earlier. The big man almost burst into tears when he saw his raft. He excitedly walked towards it. Great, he could finally leave this ghost place. Whoosh! A flash of sword light beat him to it, directly slicing his raft in half. The big man watched as his raft slowly sank into the sea. He was in despair, angrily wanting to turn around and curse her, but what he saw was her sweet smile. A good deed should be done thoroughly. Since you helped me, I should help you get all the way home. Your raft was too slow, so I'll just do you a favor and send you home myself. How about it? Are you touched? And Ling had a harmless smile on her face, revealing two small canines, looking very cute. The big man wanted to retort, but he looked up at the flying sword hovering over his head and wisely swallowed his words. Touched. I'm so touched. Boo-hoo-hoo. Beauty, you're really a good person. Chapter 98. A brand new card. As long as you're touched, that's enough. I'm a very reasonable person. Let's go, she said with a smile, walking towards her wooden boat without paying any attention to the big man's reaction. Now that his raft was destroyed, his only chance of survival was here, and he couldn't afford to give it up. Sure enough, seeing Ling about to leave, the big man quickly followed. Rather than sinking to the bottom of the sea with the resource island, he'd rather be on her boat. At least this way, he had a sliver of hope. The positioning navigator, controlled by Ling's ability, slowly floated onto the boat and was placed at the bow. Then, she leisurely leaned back in the wooden cabin and closed her eyes to rest. After a moment, the big man also stepped onto the small boat. You control the direction according to the navigator. And Ling didn't even open her eyes, directly using her ability to raise the anchor and start the boat. It was daytime, so her small wooden boat's power was practically unlimited, and she didn't have to worry about anything. The big man could only obediently follow the navigator and slowly steer the boat towards his construction island. He had nowhere else to go. 2 hours later, the two of them finally reached their destination. Ling, who had rested along the way, opened her eyes and looked at the small island in the distance, which was probably only a dozen square meters in size. Her guess was correct. As long as survivors knew the precise coordinates, they could meet each other here. So, it wasn't necessary to enter a survival island to see other living people. It could be done on construction islands. Strictly speaking, the survivors who met here shouldn't have any necessary grudges, but no, I can't presume to understand the evil of human nature. There would definitely be people who would go on a killing spree, for food, for development, or for women. In an instant, Ling thought of many possibilities, but the known information was too little to make a judgment. For example, could they form illegal teams? Or, would two people on the same construction island also enter the same survival island? These were all questions. She shook her head, no longer thinking about them, and instead observed the other person's base. You've only developed this much after such a long time? She frowned slightly. With such a survival island, she would rather drift on her wooden boat. The big man didn't know how to answer. He thought he had developed quite well. Apart from the environment being a bit crude, he at least had enough to eat and drink and was living a relatively carefree life. On the nearly 20-square-meter island, there was a relatively luxurious single-person tent with some facilities and boxes placed outside. Other than that, there was nothing else. This tent wasn't the simple triangular type made of thatch, but a rectangular structure supported by iron frames, like a house, similar to modern ones. It was evident that this dwelling had been reinforced by the big man countless times, but unfortunately, it had never been upgraded. With a thud, the boat docked next to the island. He immediately jumped down with joy, returning to his own island. For a moment, he was filled with emotion, and his only worry now was the departure of the white-haired girl behind him. "Hey, what's your name?" The girl's gentle and charming voice came from behind the big man. He turned around and answered honestly, "My name is Wanggang." Clang! A sharp sword light flashed, and the big man's pupils constricted. Then, with a thud, he fell to his knees, and his body slumped into the sea. Be more careful in your next life. And Ling stepped onto the other person's island. She never intended to truly let this guy who had tried to kill her go. He had no more value now, and it was time to grant him release. Killed survivor, obtained construction card 1, reinforcement card 1. Note: the deceased survivor's island will sink into the sea in 1 hour. And Ling was stunned, and before she could react to the information on the light screen, 2 cards suddenly appeared in her hand. So, there are actually rewards? It just seemed like the rewards weren't very generous. She thought that after killing the other person, she would get back all the cards he had used. It seemed she had been too naive. Wait, it's not a building card, it's a construction card? And Ling suddenly realized that the card in her hand wasn't purple but a kind of gray, a brand new card she had never seen before. She immediately picked it up and began to examine it. Construction card. A card produced when a construction island sinks, cannot be traded or transferred, only usable by the holder. Function. Can invite any survivor to jointly build a multi-person construction island. The invitee can convert all the materials on their construction island into disposable item cards and take them away. The island will be restored to its original state and sink shortly after. Note: all survivors on a multi-person construction island cannot be invited again using a construction card. 3 exclamation marks appeared above her head, and her face showed some shock. Although she had known for a long time that it was possible to team up, she hadn't expected that it would be obtained by killing someone. The information above was very clear. To invite someone, one had to kill someone first. Only the invitee could team up with the inviter. And once Ling became the inviter, she could only continue inviting and would lose the right to be invited. It really is a cruel game. It's not easy to band together for warmth. She put away the 2 cards and casually rummaged around the island to see if she could find anything useful. Survivors who were killed would not drop anything from their island except for the fixed rewards. And there was no way to get back the cards they had used. And Ling could only hope that the other person still had some left, otherwise, this trip would have been in vain. In the boxes, besides food, there were only some basic materials because this was the first resource island the other person had landed on, and he hadn't come into contact with mineral resources. Adhering to the principle of take it if it's free, she moved all these things onto the boat, not even sparing the tent, stove, and brazier. Let alone an hour. It only took Ling half an hour to clear out this 20-square-meter island, leaving only a mess of useless garbage. Not a single card. What bad luck. I should have forced him to use his points before killing him. This damn system, it really doesn't give when it says it won't. And Ling sat on the boat and started the propeller, and the wooden boat slowly carried her away from the small island. After adjusting the direction, she lay down in the wooden cabin to rest. Outside, the wind was calm, and the sea was like a mirror. Apart from the drifting supplies and the lonely little boat, there was nothing else. Chapter 99. A real treasure. and Ling returned to her island several hours later. The pendant's blessing had long since expired. Having not slept well initially, and after staying up all night, she was now utterly exhausted. After a quick shower, she lay naked on the bed and fell fast asleep. There was no other way. In this infernal weather, she had to maximize heat dissipation. Even the fresh water in the outdoor shower stall had been warmed by the scorching sun. Before falling asleep, Ling vaguely felt like she had forgotten something, but she was too tired to think about it. When she woke up again, the red bloodshot eyes indicated she still hadn't rested well, because she hadn't used the blessing before sleeping, and Ling didn't even know how many hours she had slept or what time it was. She rubbed her sleepy eyes, put on her slippers, and went outside. She splashed some water on her face to wake herself up and habitually turned the pendant around her neck. Blessing pendant effect. Fortune smiles upon you. Construction has a chance to trigger a random upgrade. Legendary gold. You deserve it. Time remaining. 12 hours, 24 minutes, 59 seconds. It's already noon? This damned weather, it's really hard to tell day from night. Ling estimated the time it took to go out and return, figuring she had slept for about 5 hours, which was enough to in this kind of climate. Her circadian rhythm couldn't be shifted. Good, this blessing came at the right time. She went to the furnace, refilled it with ore and fuel, and collected the smelted iron ingots. Now, Ling was going to start crafting equipment. Her ability level had increased, and she could control 3 swords simultaneously. Naturally, the first thing to do was to complete her weapon set. Copper sword. Punish evil and uphold justice, severing souls with a single strike. The perfect choice for, well, materials required: copper ingots 10, iron ingots 5, rope 5, gauze 1. Reward, points *3. These copper ingots were smelted in advance specifically for crafting weapons. Because the time here and the survival island time weren't synchronized, and Ling had only gathered enough materials for 1 copper sword in such a short time. This first attempt, of course, was reserved for it. Blessed by fortune smiles upon you. Ordinary copper sword upgraded to fine copper sword. Increased damage. Blessed by fortune smiles upon you. Ordinary copper sword upgraded to superior copper sword. Cuts iron like mud. Blessed by fortune smiles upon you. Ordinary copper sword upgraded to legendary copper sword. 3 additional attributes. A golden light flashed, and a golden long sword appeared before Ling. Legendary gold again. Am I cheating? Striking while the iron was hot, she took a deep breath to absorb the good luck and immediately started crafting the next piece of equipment. Blessed by fortune smiles upon you. Ordinary iron pickaxe upgraded to epic iron pickaxe. Increased gathering efficiency. Blessed by fortune smiles upon you. Ordinary iron axe upgraded to superior iron axe. Increased chopping efficiency. 1 purple, 1 blue. This time there was no gold. Obviously, her luck wasn't as good as the first time. Heaven wouldn't always favor her. But since they were just tools, any level would do. Ling also wanted to craft a bow, but without sinew or deer tendon. And since it wasn't absolutely necessary, she didn't bother trading for it and decided not to craft it. Looking at the dazzling array of iron and copper equipment on the workbench, none of them were what she needed, except for the sword. Who would want this heavy armor? Wait a minute. And Ling paused. If a survivor wears this armor, could it block pistol bullets? After all, it wasn't just a single layer of iron. There might be some additional effects. According to her understanding of the game, matching sets should have special bonuses, but after some calculations, she found that she didn't have enough iron ingots to create a full set. Forget it, it'll do for now. And Ling sighed and closed the interface. Tonight, she would be able to gather another 10 copper ingots, and then she would craft the last remaining sword. Back in the cabin, she finally remembered what she had forgotten before going to sleep. Chen Rue said he would give her something good, but she wasn't sure how good it was. Opening the light screen and accepting the trade, a mechanical-looking object appeared inside the wooden cabin. This is a real treasure. She stood up abruptly and placed the object on the table. Exposed motors, 3 thin iron blades staggered on a bearing, a simple triangular iron frame for support, 2 long wires connected to the back, and the other end connected to a blackboard. This simple and crude design was obviously not the style of a system reward. It was made by Chen Rue using his profession. That's right. It was a super simple electric fan. He knows how to show gratitude. I didn't help him for nothing. And Ling hung the solar panel connected to the wires outside the window. The fan inside sensed the converted electricity, and the motor immediately started spinning. A gust of warm air blew towards her, colliding with the fine sweat on her forehead, creating a cool sensation. The fan had no settings, no switch, and even the wind's speed wasn't strong. But in this desolate place, it became her only tool for escaping the heat. One should be content. At this stage, having this thing was already considered luxurious. No, I have to thank him. And Ling knew that this thing was a bit too precious. After thinking about it, she decided to give him half a watermelon to express her gratitude. As for why not a whole one? Come on. In this hot weather, a whole watermelon would go bad before it could be finished. She was also considering him. Chenrue, thanks. And Ling, you're welcome. By the way, did you make this yourself? Chenrue, of course. Architects have special buildings and tools unique to our profession. With these, it's easy to make a toy. And Ling, so that's how it is. I thought you made it by hand. Chenrue, how is that possible? I'm an architect, not Superman. And Ling, ha ha ha, that's true. Afterwards, and Ling used her remaining 2 reinforcement cards, using them all on her cabin. As she expected, the 20 square meter cabin was reinforced to 40 square meters, looking much more spacious. And the previously fired clay was enough for her to build her greenhouse, although this weather might not be suitable for planting. But with the word greenhouse, she still held a glimmer of hope. Chapter 100, The Construction Card Invitation. The 2 greenhouses covered a total area of 32 square meters, almost as large as in Ling's current cabin. Rather than calling them buildings, they were essentially just 2 plots of land carved out of the original lush green island grass, covered by a fully enclosed plastic shed, with a small door in the front for access. They were practically identical to the vegetable greenhouses and Ling remembered, the only difference being that these were a stripped-down version. However, these weren't very useful to her currently, as vegetables grew extremely slowly. Unless there were special items to accelerate their maturation, planting them would be a waste of time. Now well rested, and Ling immediately exchanged for another location card, intending to explore another resource island. After all, the last island was far too meager, and fishing here wouldn't yield much progress. It was better to gamble on the risk of location failure and go out to sea again. But as she approached the positioning navigator to use her location card, a notification popped up. Cooldown time, 1 day? Fine, play it this way, huh? And Ling gave up. Resource islands couldn't be explored consecutively. She guessed that if the location failed, not only would she waste points, but she would also enter a cooldown period, making it even more of a loss. Forget it. I'll wait for the next great fortune blessing. With her seafaring plan thwarted, and Ling collected her fishing net, carried the electric fan out to the pavilion, and started fishing listlessly. The chat module was as lively as ever, with the tense and oppressive environment not silencing the survivors. I can't take it anymore, brothers. This damn place has no cigarettes, no alcohol, no women. I might as well be dead. Just DIY, dude. Sounds like a loser. I can't believe you've survived this long without facing reality. Last time I met a beautiful female survivor on the island. Didn't even know how to resist. It was smooth sailing, let me tell you. A survivor? You dare to mess with a crazy one? What's the big deal? I'm about to go insane. I'm not just talking about survivors. Even a wild boar looks pretty to me right now. You're really starving? These survivors were always chatting about strange topics, and Ling couldn't stand it anymore. Strange, I haven't seen that online beggar. Did he die? But it was normal. For a useless bum like that, surviving the first survival island was already a stroke of luck. Bored, she decided to message Suyu, one of the few people she knew she could actually talk to. An, how's your development going? Sue, not bad. Just finished exploring my first resource island today. Speaking of which, even a busy person like you has time to talk to me. And what are you talking about? I'm so bored I've started fishing for thatch. This damn weather, I can't do anything. Sue, piffed. Luckily, I just took a shower on the resource island. It's the days ahead that I'm worried about. And I have some bad news for you. There's a chance of being discovered on your construction island, too. I shared my resource island with another survivor yesterday. Sue, huh? So the construction island isn't a private server, but a public one. And you could say that. To be precise, the survival island is more like a dungeon instance. Have you ever thought, if our islands can expand indefinitely, wouldn't the ocean get smaller and smaller? Eventually, the islands would connect, and it would become land? Sue. That's true. That's terrifying. I don't even dare to think about it anymore, and I'll show you something good. With that, Ling took out the card and used the one-click scan function on her ring to send it to Suyu. Through this function, she could see the card's information description word for word. On the other side, on the endless ocean, a lone island stood alone. The island wasn't small, compared to other survivors' construction islands, at least. It was about 100 square meters, with facilities similar to Ling's island, the same wooden cabin, though only 10 square meters, a furnace, a stove, and other furniture. However, the cabin was a chaotic mess of boxes and various materials. Suyu, wearing shorts that revealed her long, straight legs, was propped up at the table, one hand holding a wooden fan to frantically cool herself while the other looked at the light screen. A construction card? What the heck is this thing? Suyu was shocked. She had never seen such a thing before and immediately replied to Ling, "Suyu, isn't this just a team-up card? Why call it a construction card? Sounds so fancy." At first, I almost thought it was a building card. And it is a bit redundant. I'm too bored alone. Want to team up with me? Upon seeing this message, Suyu froze, even stopping fanning herself. Her mind raced with thoughts. Wait, teaming up after only knowing each other for 5 days? Isn't that a bit too fast? What if she lures me in and kills me for my loot? No, wait, I don't really have anything. What if she's after my beauty? No, she's a girl too. She's so smart, pretty, and powerful. I really shouldn't refuse, should I? Suyu's mind was in a whirlwind, imagining all sorts of scenarios. Perhaps seeing that she hadn't replied for a while, Ling sent another message. No other meaning, just that with the risk of being exposed on the construction island, having another person means more strength. If we encounter an Awaken one day, we might end up at the bottom of the sea. Sue, that's true. There will only be more and more Awakened. It's definitely a big risk. If they know they can team up like this, the killing will intensify. Can I ask why me? And I have no friends. You're the person I'm most familiar with in this world. Seeing this, Suyu was speechless for a moment, not knowing how to reply. Suddenly, inspiration struck. That's right. In the future, there will only be more and more survivors teaming up. This will become a trend. Fighting alone definitely won't work. And both of them had unique hidden professions. It would be a powerful alliance. Damn, I'm so stupid. It's rare for someone to trust me this much, and I'm still doubting her. Ling is so smart. She must have already thought of this. Suyu finally understood and immediately replied to Ling. Ling, you're so smart. I should have thought of this earlier. Hurry up and invite me.